Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Mormon Stories podcast. I'm your host, Hayley Rawle. I am guest hosting today on Mormon Stories, and I am happy and honored to be here as always. I am joined by the wonderful Gerardo, who will be co-hosting today.
Hey, everybody.
And we have two wonderful guests, Lexi and Sydney.
Hello.
A set of sisters that we're interviewing today. How are you both doing? Feeling excited?
I'm pretty excited, yeah.
Nervous? Any nerves?
Yeah, a little nervous, but
it's a big deal, right? It's a big story to tell, but I'm so excited to get into your journeys with Mormonism. We're going to kind of be talking about, obviously, both of your stories and kind of where they intertwine and how you two kind of informed each other's stories, and I can't wait to get into it all. Before we get started, I want to ask what your intention is in coming on Mormon Stories. Why are you hoping to share your Mormon story today? Whoever wants to start.
I feel like in my deconstructing journey and like leaving the church, I used Mormon Stories as like a tool to help me to make sense of like what I believe and what I had experienced. And then I also like live outside of like Mormon concentrated areas. So like I live in Ohio, and when I share my background of like having left a high demand religion, although most of the people I talk to have never been Mormon and aren't super familiar with like our faith, a lot of people have like discomfort around their religious experiences, regardless of like how deeply they were raised religiously or whatever. I feel like just kind of in the United States, especially, like a lot of people have kind of discomfort around that. So, so sharing my story is hopefully going to be helpful to other people to kind of rationalize or understand some of the experiences that they've had as well.
I love that. Thank you. Yeah, I think religion, it seems maybe niche in some ways, specifically Mormonism, but it is really cool how even if people didn't grow up religious, I think there's a lot of themes of someone's religious story that people can relate to. So I appreciate you mentioning that. What about you, Lexi?
I think going off of what Sydney said, there's a lot of different reasons people walk away from high demanding religions, and not every story is the same. So as with Mormon Stories, there's a lot of people who come in who have such different experiences, and I feel like the more people are sharing, the less people feel alone. And like, we are sisters, we're not from Utah, we grew up in Ohio, we joined the church later on, and I'm sure there's other people out there, right, that are going to experience the same things. And I am hoping that this can help reach more audiences, not just in Utah, where there's those like lone Mormons swimming around.
Totally, yeah. That shedding light on the variety of Mormon experiences, I think, is also really powerful to that same, to the point you made, because, yeah, there are definitely a lot of Utah Mormons, but that's not always the story. And I think it obviously shapes in a huge way what your experience was like with the church. Thanks for that. I'm really excited to get into it. You kind of alluded to this, Lexi, but let's just start. And if you can tell me where Mormonism first entered your lives. You're pointing to Sydney to take
I'm
that
the
one.
family historian, so I can
Perfect.
Well, I just want to say really quickly, just so everyone knows, I mean, Sydney and I became really good friends when we were at BYU-Idaho. And that's where we met the first time. I was still a believing gay member of the church attending BYU-Idaho, and she was one of the first people I came out to at BYU-Idaho. And I told her about Zach when I met Zach, and we were really good friends and really supportive throughout the entire thing, as we dated and then eventually married while going to BYU-Idaho. So yeah, that's another reason why Sydney's here, but she has definitely a really interesting story. But anyway, do you want
I'm a Nepo baby. That's how I got on the podcast.
You know the one and only Gerardo.
I know Gerardo. So our family, I guess. So my mom was the first person to join the church when she was like middle school age. Her family joined the church. So her mom, her, and then her 3 younger brothers, but kind of had like a short stint of going to church. They just were baptized, went for a little bit, and then kind of stopped going.
Were they baptized by missionaries? How did they come to know the
Yeah, they were
church?
baptized by missionaries, and were drawn to the kind of service aspect of the church, like service that was provided to their family. So that's kind of the story of how they joined the church. And then my mom kind of like was in and out of the church, like in her young adulthood. And then when she married our dad, he was not a member of the church. But so Alexis and I have an older brother, Lexi and I have an older brother. So when he and I were both like really little, our dad joined the church. Our parents were married in the church. Alexis was born. And then later, when our parents were getting divorced, there was like a lot of pressure on my mom to like stay married to my dad because they had gotten married in the temple. And she was told that like if our dad wasn't doing what he was supposed to be doing, like in regards to his like covenants, that basically she didn't have any promise of like being with us, like her children for eternity. So she was like, okay, then why would I go to church?
Yeah.
So that's kind of where our family stopped going to church. So we kind of went for like a little bit when we were really young. And then...
Can I just clarify really
Yes,
quick? So
yeah.
you're saying your dad, though he was baptized in the church and your parents got married in the temple,
Yeah.
your dad stopped keeping Mormon commandments, doing the Mormon way. Is that right?
Yes.
And then that led to your mom realizing, okay, well, if I'm not going to get the promise of an eternal family because based on my husband, then why would I continue attending church?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
And how old were you at that point? You said quite young.
Yeah, so when my parents separated, I was like going into first grade, so like 6 years old. And then so Lexi was like 2 years old. So we were pretty young.
I think one of the things too is like it wasn't just our dad straight away from the church and it was like this isn't true. It was like he was pretty abusive to like our mom and started to be, I don't remember it being me because I was also baby, but to like Sydney and my older brother, and the fact that her bishop was like, no, you still have to stay with that. I feel like that's where a lot of those issues were. So it wasn't just he stopped believing. It was he is being abusive and the church is telling my mom that she needs to stay with him or she's not going to be with her family for the rest of her life.
Got it. Yeah. So getting the messaging of stay with this abusive person in order just to maintain the eternal family unit. Wow. Yeah. Good for your mom for calling that out for what that is.
Yeah, she's
not great.
She's the coolest.
Yeah. Sounds like it. Okay. So at that point, you're kids. And then it seems like Mormonism must enter the picture again later. So when does it pop back up then for you?
Yeah, so several years after that, our mom got remarried to our stepdad, who was also not a Mormon, or like not religious at all. They got married. They're coming up on their like 17-year anniversary, like next week, I think.
Congrats.
Yeah. So they got married, and then it was still a few years after that. So I was like 16 that the missionaries came to our house just to like, you know how they stop in.
Show up.
Yeah, they just show up. So they came to our house, and my mom and I were both home, but my mom was like upstairs sleeping. But I was like, yeah, guys, come on in. And so they came in.
Do you know if they stopped by because of the records of the church that they were still members, and then you were like potentially?
I'm
kids?
assuming, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah. And we had like during our years of like being inactive in the church, people would stop by, like missionaries would come by, or like people from the church. So we were like, I recognized that we were like Mormon, I guess, but I didn't think like I was just like, oh yeah, like we're Mormon, but like I didn't know literally anything about the church. Yeah. So when the missionaries came and they were talking to me, they were like, so like, what do you know about the Book of Mormon? And I was like, I don't know anything. Like, I don't know what that is really. And they were like, oh, okay. And I felt kind of like guilty, like, oh, I should know because I think I'm Mormon. Like, I really don't. Like, I don't know. So they were like, okay, like, well, what do you know about Jesus Christ? And I was like, I don't know anything about Jesus Christ. Like, and I felt like bad, like I should know.
Those are the answers that missionaries love, though.
Yeah, you were the perfect target
exactly,
after that.
Exactly. We were like the golden family, right? So like after they left, I like went upstairs and woke up my mom, and I was like, the missionaries came and they asked me what I know, and I don't know anything, and like I think we should go to church. And she was like, okay. And then we just like that Sunday started going to church and like never really stopped.
Wow.
Until the future.
Yeah. Those missionaries were probably thrilled
yes.
to have a full family brought back to activity by that one encounter. That's a huge deal. Before you went back to church, you said you knew you were a Mormon in some sense, but didn't really know much about it. Did you have any feel for how Mormons were perceived in your community? What was it like at that time? How did you even connect with the word Mormon, if that makes sense? Because you were living in Ohio, and I'm curious if you had any concept of how other people viewed Mormons, or if you were just too young to really care about any of that at that point.
Yeah, I think like people don't really view Mormons or like at the time. So like
they don't think about it.
Yeah, they just don't think about it, or like they're just totally not familiar at all. So sometimes we would tell people. So when we started going to church, it was like me and Lexi, and I had been baptized already, like in another like small stint of like activity when I was younger, but Lexi had not. So she got baptized, and our stepdad got baptized. And when we would share this with like our friends or whatever, they'd be like, what is Mormons? Like, I've never heard of that. Or like, yeah. So we would share because we were like good new member missionaries, like inviting people like, do you want to come? My sister's getting baptized. And we had a bunch of friends that we invited to speak with the missionaries. But yeah, mostly like nobody really knew what it was unless they knew us, and they were like, oh yeah, the Wingate girls, like
they're Mormons.
They're Mormons. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So there wasn't any bad sentiment or anything. It was just more so people didn't really know what.
Yeah. And my
Mormons
experience, I don't know if.
My experience was the same, because I also feel like for the most part, like it was just me and Sydney in our high school. Like there's another family in our high school, but it was a pretty big high school. And it wasn't until like we went on our missions that people were like, oh, so like, what is this? But before that, I don't think I had ever heard of Mormon. I didn't even like associate us with like Mormons. And so her saying that, I'm just like, oh yeah, like that's cool. But I think I was just too little to really comprehend it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes sense.
I am curious, because when you are going to get baptized as a convert, you were 16, you said. There are things that you have to accept that are probably not very common for a 16-year-old to accept. You know, that there was some golden plates and an angel delivered them to Joseph Smith. Like, was that anything, because this was the first time you were hearing about these things, was it something that was hard to accept, or it was like, oh yeah, that sounds good. I mean, sounds reasonable. It happened. Do you remember any of that?
Yeah. So I was baptized actually when I was like 11, I think, or maybe 9. Just like a period of time where our mom was still like a single mom, but felt motivated by whatever was happening at the time to like bring us to church for a little bit. So I would say maybe like a couple months, like long enough to get baptized. So my older brother and I got baptized But that period of activity didn't last super long because they would like try to give my mom callings, and she's like a single mom and works full time and has 3 kids, you know. So I think that it was like easy for me to accept things because I kind of felt already like I was Mormon, even though I guess I was because I was baptized, but I didn't know really like anything at all. There were some things starting to go to church because when I was 16, I was already starting to kind of develop my like worldviews of being a little bit more like progressive, I guess. So I remember going to church and being like, why do I have to go to a class with just girls? Like, why can't we just like learn together? Like, this is really weird. And it feels kind of like sexist. Like that's what I was like thinking. And at the same time, I would see people who were like sharing their testimonies and being really like earnest and like getting emotional about how much they believed. And as a 16-year-old, like wanting to feel like loved and accepted, like young people are like always searching for, I really felt like, even though I wasn't really like vibing with like the like youth situation and like separate classes and stuff, I really felt like I want to push through this kind of like weird stuff because I want to feel the way that these people feel. Like I wanted to have a testimony. So I think that was anything that I didn't understand. I was like, oh, it's because it's new. And I just kept pushing through that.
Yeah, the whole situation is interesting because it feels like you were kind of primed to just maybe not care as much about some of the things that might feel odd or surprising because you had enough exposure to it. And then, of course, when you're a 16-year-old, it makes sense that the things that you're paying attention to are just the emotion, the feeling of belonging, and being motivated by those things more so. I'm curious to hear more about both of your experiences then as teenagers. So you are now attending at 16. You were 13-ish.
Yeah, 13, 14.
And you got baptized. Do you have anything to Gerardo's question? Do you remember even what you were taught as a 13-year-old?
I'm going to be honest, no. Because when you're like younger and you have your older sister, it's like you want to have that relationship with them. And I feel like that's a lot of the reasons I was like going with the church thing, because for me, I was like, I don't really want to do anything with religion, but my super cool sister's doing this. And the missionaries that were coming to our house, like they were so fun. One of them was fun. The other one was, but he was like consistently in our area for like 13 months or something.
The fun one.
Yeah. So that's why I remember him mostly, but it was like, I love the fun energy that's coming with it. I love how it's bringing me and my sister together. I love going to like the youth activities with my sister. And so I didn't really think about anything because then when I would go to like school, I'd be like, I'm Mormon. People would be like, what does that mean? And I'm like, I have no idea. I don't know. And I remember like one time during like history class, we were talking about like the Mormon pioneers coming through, and I was talking about the church, and my like teacher even corrected me on the proper name of the whole church. And I was just like, oh, that's crazy. I thought it was just Mormons. So mine was more of like, I wanted to follow my sister. I didn't really know what I was getting into until later on.
Yeah, I think that also makes so much sense as a 13-year-old. Your sister's doing it, your family's doing it. There's an appeal of maybe fun activities or meeting new people. So I think that also makes a lot of sense. I think I would be doing the same thing as a 13-year-old. Let's talk about from that point. So now you're in church. You spoke to this a little bit, Sydney, but talk me through what it was like being Mormon teenagers living in Ohio. Any experiences come to mind, or just how you would characterize the rest of the time from joining or kind of rejoining the church? What were those years like growing up in the church?
Yeah. So I feel like, overall, like as young people, I feel like being in the church was really positive for us. And it created a space where we had a lot of positive affirmations from other adults in our lives. So like we grew up for a long period of time, like in a single parent household. There's a lot of like divorce in our family, and seeing like all of these like young families in our ward. We live close to a military base, an Air Force base in Ohio. So we would have a lot of families from Utah who would like come through doing their residencies or just being stationed at the Air Force base or whatever. So we were like around all of these like young, beautiful families. And it's like, wow, that's so cool. Like they are dads like present in their kids' lives. And like, I feel like that was like really impactful for me as a 16-year-old girl to see. And kind of, I had never really thought like growing up about like getting married or having a family. I was like, oh, I'll go to college, like, and work, you know? And I remember one of the young women, she was telling me that her sister was on a mission. And I was like, oh, what's that? Even though we literally like had missionaries at our house, I didn't understand like where they came from or like what
how that all worked.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, oh, she is. And she's like, yeah. And at the time you had to be 21 to go on a mission. And
for women.
For women. Yeah, for women. And I asked, like, is that something you want to do? And she was like, yeah, if I'm not married before then. And I thought that she was joking. Like, I laughed and I was like, right, like, yeah, that's so random. Like, who wants to get married? And she was like, I do. And I was like, oh, like, yeah, I guess that sounds nice. Like, so I was like getting kind of this messaging of like the importance of the family, right? Is the shining beacon of the church is like the family. And I really connected to that and was like, wow, that's great. And then every time that we like gave our little like young women's like talks in front of the church and we're like so awkward and like saying our thing, then after everyone's like, great job, like you guys are so awesome. Like we were just getting all this like positive reinforcement all the time. So yeah, I feel like at the time I was like, yeah, I love this. Like I'm the young women's and like mutual activities are kind of awkward, but like when I go to my Sunday school classes, I have all these great teachers who care about me and think that I'm awesome because I'm like learning about the church.
Well, and because you were inactive and then are active too, you kind of become you're a little bit on the spotlight, right? Because you were not there and then you're now there and a little bit more taken care of. I don't know.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's so fascinating to hear your perspective, especially on the marriage thing, because I was a born and raised Utah Mormon, and when you can compare experiences, I almost have the opposite experience where when someone was like, yeah, I won't go on a mission. I will go on a mission if I don't get married before then. I just have heard that since I was as far back as I can remember. And it's fascinating that you were coming from this place of how different that felt for you. And then you start swimming in it and how quickly that can start changing an impressionable young mind about what's important to you and what your priorities are in life. And it makes sense that it would, right? Because as you said, you're seeing maybe the best in a lot of ways of Mormonism, these happy, seemingly happy young families, and the community aspect of it sounds like it was working really well for where you were at. What about you, Lexi? Do you similar, different? What was your experience
I would
like
say
in that way?
Similar to like the praise content of it. And I feel like because we dove right into it after we joined the church, it wasn't like those families you see where they start meeting with the missionaries and then they just stop coming. It was like we were full force, like all of us. Like my mom got a calling, my stepdad got a calling. We were like in the youth callings and we were just everywhere. We made friends really quickly and like the other wards, because here in Utah, like all the wards are really close together, where each ward in our stake was kind of a distance away from each other. And I feel like we grew up pretty independent, but when we joined the church, I feel like it made us more dependent. Like I I was thinking about this the other day where me and Sydney started talking about like men all the time, and we would be like, what you would say is like boy crazy. And like when the missionaries would come in, we'd be like, oh my gosh, like they're so cute. Like we're going to see what they're doing after the mission. But it's like, that's what we were taught that like we should be doing. We should be looking for who we're going to marry, where we had like this great example of our mom who like did it herself, like being a single mother for so long. And we're just like, okay, like we have to get married. We have to look at whatever boy, like this boy sitting next to me in Sunday school could be my husband. And it's just like a weird thought process, especially since like we are so early into puberty, like we don't really know that much about ourselves. Why are we thinking about marriage now? Why are we thinking about what our wedding's going to look like and how many kids we want in the future?
And you feel like that was different, it sounds like, from how you felt before being in the church, and also presumably different from like maybe what your peers were thinking about.
For sure. Yeah, totally different from what our peers were talking about. And I remember too, so right before joining the church or coming back to the church, I just felt like a pretty regular like teenager, I guess. But then I was like, oh, I should probably start dressing more modestly because they talk about modesty in church all the time. And maybe I should stop swearing like with my friends because you shouldn't swear. Like, and I kind of like slowly implemented those things. I guess like as soon as they like sunk into my brain, like, oh, they're teaching me these things because I should be doing them. Like, it's not just because like, oh, like I go to church and see what they've got going on. I'm like, oh wait, like I'm a part of this and I should be kind of like representing that when I'm at school or when I'm with my friends. And I had friends who noticed, like I would like say like, oh, flip instead of an expletive. And they'd be like, wait, do you not swear? Oh, no, I don't. They're like, did you used to swear? I think. And yeah, so sometimes like my friends, I mean, my close friends obviously knew that we were going to church and I was kind of going through this transition. But yeah, just like my peers, classmates, they're like, wait, that's interesting. Like kind of noticing the difference.
Yeah.
It set you apart in a lot of ways that you, before you were one way and then people are all of a sudden like, wait, you're a little bit different than you were. And then we are probably. I'm curious about the way that you identified with the doctrine of the church, especially as you're learning it as teenagers. Like we've talked a lot about the culture. Tell me about what it was like to be learning about Mormon doctrine, how much you were learning, and if there were any things that were surprising you or strange to you, what it was like kind of, I guess, developing a testimony, it sounds like, again, or for the first time.
I would say for me, like a lot of things just didn't stick because when I was going to activities, it would be like, we're going to read the scripture right now and then talk about how it correlates to like school. It was never like, let's talk about like Joseph Smith and how things came about. Like, and I feel like that, I don't know if that's like on purpose or if it's because it's just so like beaten down because everywhere you go, it's like X, Y, and Z. And so they wanted to make it more personable to us, but they would just like use scriptures and it could be scriptures from like the Bible or the Book of Mormon.
So you weren't learning a lot of foundings of the Mormon church, Mormon history, things like that weren't really being taught to you?
Yeah, I think the way that you described it, Lexi, is like, I hadn't really thought of it before. But yeah, like when you have like lessons or whatever, they're not really talking about the doctrine. They're talking about how you can apply it to like living the doctrine. Mm-hmm. And I think too, there's like a whole language in Mormonism. So when we were coming in, and I feel similarly that a lot of stuff didn't really stick because we didn't have like the whole context. Like I remember one of the first times that we were like going back to church, we went to a fireside for like youth or whatever. And the stake patriarch was like giving a talk about patriarchal blessings. And I was like, I had literally no idea what they were talking about. Like, I had never heard of a patriarchal blessing.
Yeah.
Like, I wasn't familiar with it, like, at all. So I was just like, oh, okay, like,
Yeah.
like looking around, like, what's everyone going on? Like, what's up with the walls in here? Like, why are they so scratchy? Like, you know, like, I think that that's kind of a lot of it.
Yeah.
Even when like I mentioned before, I never really thought about like where the missionaries came from until they announced the age change for missionaries. So in General Conference, they announced previously young men would go on their missions starting when they're 19 years old, and young women could go starting when they're 21. So they changed the ages. So young men could go at 18 and young women could go at 19. And something like in that, so when they made that change, I was like a senior in high school. And I was like, oh, I could go on a mission like that. And that had never occurred to me before, that like young people like me are who the missionaries are. Like they leave their homes and like whatever.
That's really interesting because if you think about, about the lingo, and if you don't know what the word covenants means or revelation or translation, or a lot of these things just go over your head because like they say revelation this, revelation that. What does that even mean? Prophet, seer, and revelation. What does that actually mean? So,
and to your point, it seemed like it just seemed irrelevant too. Because if you're reading a scripture about, I don't know, discipline, and they're like, this is why you should be disciplined in school. It's like, yeah, that's pretty easy to digest.
Right.
And then maybe these stranger concepts like a patriarchal blessing just probably feels less relevant in a lot of ways. So you're not really internalizing that maybe the same way, because why would you, if you don't feel like it's relevant to you? The mission age change, before we get to the mission thing, actually, I wanted to ask if you can think back to those years, maybe you as well, Lexi, like when you're in, you're old enough that you're understanding these things we're talking about. Maybe you're not internalizing some of these concepts. Do you feel like you were true believers? Like, how much do you feel like you believed in the Mormon church? Did you want to defend it if people were asking questions about it? How did you relate to the belief system of Mormonism in that way?
I think for me, it was a lot of, I never defended it. Like when I started telling people that I was Mormon, and my friends would like do research, find things like on South Park and stuff, and they would make those jokes, I'd be like, absolutely. Because I just didn't understand it. I always thought it was just fun, and I thought it was all make believe. And it was like, I was still going out and doing things, because my senior year, my last 2 years, I went to a vocational high school. And so there was a lot of feeder schools that went to this school. So I was able to meet a lot of people who had interacted with people who were a part of the Mormon faith. And from what I was doing at the time, they would always be like, they would call me like Lexi the cool Mormon, because they were introduced to like Mormons who were very strict, like probably never cussed, never like did anything, never strayed away from like their golden path, right? But for me, I was going out with my friends. I was doing things I probably shouldn't have done, and they were associated, but I still would call myself a Mormon. So they would be like, yeah, Lexi's the cool Mormon, like we'll keep her around. But I never really found myself defending it, but I would claim the title.
Interesting. When you say doing things you shouldn't be doing, do you mean that by Mormon standards, or just generally speaking? What were the things that you were doing, I guess?
I would say definitely from like the Mormon standard and just like general standard. I was going out to like parties with my friends, and one of the things is like me trying to hide it from like the church, but also trying to hide it from my mom. But I would also use the church to cover up so I could cover it from my mom. So if she was just like, oh, like I heard you were doing, like you were smoking pot or something, I'd be like, no, Mom, like I want to go to the temple. But then when I would talk to like when I would talk to my other friends, I'd be like, yeah, absolutely. Like, yes, I'm Mormon, but I'm ready to go to this like barn party with you right now.
And drinking, trying drugs, all of that, but kind of able to use the church a little bit as a cover for some of that.
Yes,
too.
Absolutely.
You were working the system in all directions.
And I feel like it worked out for me, because it's like I still was able to be successful in life. However, I still was able to experience my life.
Totally. Did you have any experiences like that, Sydney, while you were in high school?
No, my experience was pretty opposite to that, where I was like, I don't want God to see me doing bad things. Like I was like pretty earnest and like I really believed everything and I really wanted to be a part of it. And I could see like at the beginning that I didn't really believe or like I didn't really feel strongly about it. And I wanted to feel strongly about it. So I like would go to all of the activities and I was like, like really trying to learn. But even then my understanding of the church, like doctrinally was like very basic, like the missionary lessons, like the gospel of Jesus Christ, like faith and repentance and baptism and things like that. Like I didn't know. So to your question, if we were like defensive, I didn't know like anything about church history besides like the restoration like video and like we watched like 17 Miracles at like youth conference or something. Like I really didn't know that much. So I would be defensive, but like in a way that was like completely inaccurate. Like I didn't know that Joseph Smith had multiple wives. And when people said that he did, I would say, no, he didn't. And I'm Mormon and I know, you know, but
like the video
I
didn't
know.
that?
Yeah. Cause I've only seen Joseph Smith in the church videos, you know, like I didn't have any like historical context for it. So I would defend, but I would just be like totally wrong.
Yeah. It sounds like you were more of a literal believer, though. I mean, at least more so than Lexi. Like, you really internalized it, where Lexi, it sounds like you're kind of like, yeah, like, I'll take the good of this, but, you know, gonna do my own thing as well. Absolutely. Did that ever cause friction between the two of you as you were living it out differently?
I was really good at hiding it. I don't think anyone ever knew until, like, my adult life.
That's what you were up to as a teenager.
Yeah, that checks out. I think I didn't really know. I just thought like, yeah, we're all in this together.
Are you just finding out right now?
No, I know now, but
You're like, wait a second.
Yeah, I think too. So learning like doctrinally as well. So I had already like I was starting to develop my like worldviews like right before joining the church. So even like I always had pretty nuanced views about things. I have always had gay friends since like middle school, high school. Like if a man talks to me or a boy talks to me and like thinks I'm funny, like they're probably gay. You know what I'm saying? Like they're just really drawn to me and I'm drawn to them. And so that was something like in my high school years too, I'm thinking like I'm joining this church. I like one of my friends who is gay and was like openly gay at the time came to church with me. I like shared with him the like Mormons and Gays website and was like, I mean, if this speaks to you, like you could be in it if you want, you know, like I always had like, especially for like the LGBTQ plus community, I always had a very big open heart. So I always had a disconnect between what was being taught in the church. But I also felt like, well, the Mormon church is like actually kind of progressive about gay people because they're saying like, it's not a choice to be gay. And I really believe that. So like, yeah, that kind of, like it felt like better to me than other, like especially Christian religions or like organized religions. I was like, well, this is kind of progressive.
Or do you remember how you heard about Mormon and Gay's website, Mormon and Gay?
I don't know. I kind of feel like maybe they like. Did they ever like announce that they made it? I don't think so,
but maybe you just Googled it.
I might have just Googled it. Yeah. It was like, "What's up with gay Mormons?" I'm interested in that. But I also, because of that kind of like mindset that I had when I learned about like what the Book of Mormon actually was, that it's like another testament of like another people who also like had prophets and were being taught, to me, that felt like super equitable. And I was like, wow, that's like really cool. Like, it's not like a chosen people. It's like everybody who was alive at the time, like had a prophet and got to learn about Jesus Christ and like got to know the gospel of Jesus Christ. So I was like, wow, that's like really cool. Like, that's super like everybody gets a chance, where other churches like don't teach that. So I think, yeah, I really had like a pretty earnest belief of like, wow, this sounds like cool. Or like even the kingdoms of glory, I was like, oh, so like nobody goes to hell. Like that really feels good to me. Like, even though they're not like all gonna be with God, like we're still gonna all have like kingdoms of glory. So like those like doctrinal pieces really spoke to me as like a young, like open-hearted, a young like progressive like 16-year-old girl in like a swing state of Ohio. I was like, yeah, like I can be religious and I can like
love everybody.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
which
be
shouldn't
equitable.
be like, exactly.
Yeah.
But
I'm curious too if it may be difficult to answer not having an experience to compare to, but I wonder if in Ohio perhaps there was more of a progressive bend to what you were being taught. It sounds like maybe some of these things were emphasized to you, the things that were of an equitable nature and a more compassionate nature. And yeah, that may be difficult to say, but I don't know if you felt like you were receiving some of that in the messaging directly from church leaders or in lessons and things like that.
Yeah, I don't know if I can speak to that either. Not that I remember. I feel like it was like pretty standard, like lessons, I guess. But I think just my like interpretation of it, I was like, oh, that's like so cool and equal, even though I don't think anyone was like saying it that way. They were just like, yeah, we have another testament and it's cool. And in my brain, I was like, that is so cool because everybody gets a chance. And like, you know, so I guess the Book of Mormon is framed as like, it's another testament of like Jesus Christ. So we have two groups of people saying that Jesus Christ existed. So it's like proof, I guess.
And then it ends up being that the people in the Book of Mormon are Jews as well. It's not like God went to a different tribe or a different, to the Gentiles. At the end, Lehi and Nephi, they all descend from supposedly from the Jews. And then, especially now that becomes complicated when the church church apologist wants to say, well, the Nephites and Lamanites, they were all just small group of people in America. There were a lot of other people here. But yeah, that's kind of interesting that's how you were interpreting it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's mostly what it was. That's how I was interpreting it.
Yeah.
And then again, like, yeah, I just like went out like on a mission, like with like, I believe in Jesus Christ in my back pocket. Like that was it. Like I really did not have a lot of that context of like, oh, like they actually were like coming from Jerusalem. So they were still kind of like Jews. The chosen people. And to me, that wasn't how the story went.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't piece that together until in my deconstruction too, and I was living in Utah where I was much more steeped in it. So I think, that makes a lot of sense. I want to talk about the mission. Before we do, is there anything else you want to ask about those teenage years?
How about the arbitrary rules that sometimes are given to the youth, about, you were talking about modesty, girls camp, you shouldn't wear a two-piece swimsuit, or like you should be dressing this way or shouldn't be doing that or this, like, or how about also bishop interviews where you're asked if you're following these rules? Do you have any memory of any of that? And if any of that was ever strange to you, not being raised in a Mormon background?
Yeah, I guess we really didn't have like an understanding of like garments at all. So like when they're talking about like modesty standards, it's like in preparation for like your garments. Like you need to dress in a way that wouldn't show your garments if you were wearing garments. And I was like, whatever that's about, like, I guess I'll learn about that in the future. Like, it didn't really seem super pressing to me, but I also was kind of like, what's that all about? Like, I didn't really understand garments until I had like already been wearing them for like a long time. Like when people were like, yeah, what's your underwear about? I'd be like,
Not so sure.
yeah, exactly. Like,
How about baptism?
it's sacred, so I don't want to. I don't want to talk about it. But like, I just didn't really know what it was all about. And I think like there's like a big like Mormon culture versus like Mormon doctrine. We didn't really have like a deep understanding of like what Mormon culture was, like not being from Utah or like having any connections like out west to like pioneer Mormons and like whatever. So like they're like, oh, people like leave because they're offended or whatever. And I was like, well, that's silly. Like just thinking like someone in your ward said something that offended you. And I'm like, that would be a silly reason to leave the church. And not understanding like they're offended by like church leaders or they're offended by changes in policy or whatever it may be. I just didn't understand the extent of what Mormon culture was because we were not in it at all.
Yeah.
Besides our ward.
Yeah, you were maybe kind of spared some of the things that a Utah Mormon or an Idaho Mormon might experience because it sounds like the Mormon culture you were in was just so different and maybe more pure also in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of like the youth, because we would do a lot of like stake activities because that's all the youth that was there. And I feel like we were always just like so excited to see each other. Like when we were doing like youth conferences or something, we were just so excited to get together with our friends and like share the same beliefs, where it's like we didn't really think about like the BYU, I don't know if I could say that, sorry. But of like Utah and like the big schools out here and how there's so many more Mormons, where we were just like secluded to who was in our state, who was in our proximity. And sometimes that would be us going to hang out with our friends who were in the church, but having to drive an hour away.
Yeah, so maybe just less worried about what your friend was wearing and more just, oh, yay, my Mormon friend that, you know, I don't get to see my Mormon friends when I'm at high school or whatever. Yeah, that sounds like a really nice community in a lot of ways.
I feel pretty positively about like our time as like youth in the church. And I think like culturally in larger like concentrated areas of Mormon people, there's a lot more like checking each other and like seeing like whatever people are doing. Where like for us, it was like our handful of friends that we saw regularly. And then there would be people who were kind of like, would come sometimes and we'd be like, oh, they're kind of less active, but like, that's our friend. And like, and we, like, I worked at an ice cream like restaurant in town. And when people would come through from the ward, they would be like, oh, Sydney. And I would give them like family discount. Like we just like really, it felt like really positive. And like, I have like really good and like fond memories of like being in church and like the people that we were with. So it was like, it's like a big culture shock too when you go to an area where like everybody's Mormon. It's like in Ohio, we're like, yeah, like we're friends, like we're Mormons, we go to the same church, like we have the same beliefs and standards. But then when you're like at a CES school or whatever, it's like, yeah, like we're all Mormon, like you mean nothing to me. Like it's not like you don't have that
bond
same
you just by virtue of being Mormon.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
It's kind of humbling.
I bet it was a huge culture shock. Before we get to that, I wanted to just ask you, Lexi, did you have any, because you said that you were experimenting with drugs and alcohol and doing these things. Did you ever have any friction where your bishop asked you about that? Did you just never tell your bishop? Was there any guilt or shame that you were experiencing around those things, or were you able to compartmentalize?
I'm going to be so honest with you. I don't feel like I really had shame. I remember doing like the temple interview questions and my brain just being like, well, this is between me and God. So I don't really need to tell this random man that I don't really know. Like I only met him a year ago.
That's progressive.
Yeah, hell yeah. That rocks.
But I was just like, I don't need to tell him what I'm doing. Like if I feel guilty, I can go to God. And so like in my temple interview questions, I would lie and be like, yes, I am keeping the word of wisdom. And I do remember though, like the one time I kind of got caught because there was a family in our ward who also went to our high school, and they had told their mom, who was in our ward, who told my mom that I was smoking weed.
So still some community policing,
Yes.
unfortunately, yeah.
And I remember my heart just like dropping, and I was like, maybe I should actually kind of like pay attention to what I'm doing and seeing. I think probably at the time my brain was like, okay, who's around me when I'm doing this so I don't get caught again. But at the same time, I remember talking to my mom and she brought up like the temple, and I was just like, wait, you're right. Like maybe I should be more focused on like, why am I going to the temple and shouldn't do it? That doesn't mean I stopped in that moment, but it gave me more of like a wake up call in that moment.
Caused a little, reflection.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome though. I mean, being at that age able to have the wherewithal to be like, I'm doing what feels right by me, and that's between me and God and not up for this random guy I don't know to even chime in on. I think that's really impressive and probably saved you, a lot of mental turmoil around not doing things the exact Mormon way. So I'm jealous in a lot of ways. I wish I could have been that way.
I know. I'm so proud of little me.
Yeah, that's incredible. Let's get into the mission then. So you were saying, Sydney, that you heard about the mission age change. So women were now allowed to go on missions at 19. What led you to want to go on a mission, and what was that journey like? When did you decide, and the journey leading up to your mission?
Yeah, so when they made the age change, like during General Conference, I felt like, wow, like that's something I could do. I think I want to serve a mission. But there also weren't, like in our ward, there weren't really like young people going out on missions. Like, so I didn't really have anybody to like ask about like the preparation process for it. We had people who were like adults who were returned missionaries. But like just things change so like quickly or whatever. So I just didn't have like a ton of, I think, guidance for how to go about serving a mission until like my peers were starting to prepare for their missions. So I felt like I wanted to go on a mission. I was a senior in high school. I was accepted to go to Ohio State University. But then I was thinking like, well, it's really expensive. I'm going to have to take out like loans. And then I don't know where I got this information from, but that like you can't go on a mission if you have debt, which is probably like, I don't know, credit card debt or something. I don't even know if they care about if you have debt or not.
I've never heard about it. Have you?
I haven't heard about it either. I know that's a thing, I think, for the Army, but I don't know. But it could be a thing. I don't know.
Yeah, or maybe it was just like somebody's advice to me, like don't get a bunch of debt before you go on your mission because like it'll be a hassle or whatever. But I don't know, something I had that like belief from somewhere that you can't like have debt if you go on your mission. And I was like, well, if I go to Ohio State, I'm definitely going to have debt. So I was also accepted to like a local university, and I had some like scholarships to go there. But I didn't want to go there. I wanted to go to Ohio State, and I was like signed up for like housing in the fall, and like I had all these things, and then I just like, I don't know, I randomly felt like I really need to go on a mission. So I decided to not go to Ohio State. I had to like tell my friend that I was gonna be a roommate with, like, I can't be your roommate anymore. And she wasn't Mormon, but she was like so sweet and was like, that's great that you're gonna go on a mission and like do something that you believe in, like I understand. And so yeah, I guess then, yeah, I just, that was my new focus. Like instead of preparing to like go, like move out to go to college, I was like preparing to go on a mission and like saving my money so I can like pay for my mission. And yeah, I got like a lot of support from the ward as well. Like everyone was really excited that I was going on a mission. And I felt pretty confident that like, I at this point I had never read the Book of Mormon. Like I didn't really have like a deep like I wasn't really going to seminary. Like I went like sporadically. We had early morning seminary, so it started at like I don't know 6:30, 6 in the morning, and it was like on the other side of town and like whatever. And I didn't have parents who made me go, which that's how you get seminary graduates in Ohio is you have parents that make you go.
Yeah, that's too early.
Yeah, so I just really didn't have like, I didn't have any like scripture masteries I could pull out. Like I was just like, I believe in the church. I know the church is true. I know Joseph Smith was a prophet, and that's enough. And I also felt like we had missionaries come to our family and take us like and teach us the gospel and help us go to church. So I kind of felt like a pay it forward thing too. Like, yeah, I want to help other families like mine, and that's it.
Yeah, probably just had a really good, strong connection with missionaries, generally speaking.
Yeah, for sure.
Which I can imagine affected that a lot. So did you end up going to school before your mission, or did you not go to school and then just went straight on a mission?
I went to school for one semester, not at Ohio State, at a local university. So I just commuted. I went for one semester. I got my mission call in October. I turned 19 in November, and I left for my mission in February.
Wow. What did you think about when you got your call? Did you know where it was?
Yeah. So I served in the Bolivia Cochabamba mission. And when I got it, I like took Spanish in high school. So I had like a rough idea of like Spanish speaking countries. That's like part of the curriculum. But I wouldn't have been able to like point it out on a map.
Yeah. I don't think I can right now.
I was going to say, I still can't. So.
Yeah. So, it was called Spanish speaking. It's a Spanish speaking country. And I was like so excited, like that I was going. I got my patriarchal blessing around the same time that I was, applying, like filling out my mission papers. And our stake patriarch, he told me that when he was filling out his mission papers, they asked like where he wanted to go. And he said that he wanted to go to Paris, France. And that's where he went on his mission. And he was like, so I don't know if they're going to ask you, but if there's a space that you can like write in, like you might as well ask where you want to go. And like, if you don't go, you don't go. But like,
did you have a preference on a?
Yeah. So I put in my mission papers, there was like a section that was like, is there anything else you want the brethren to know? And I was like, I would like to go to the Scotland, Ireland mission. Oh. Thank you so much. But so I didn't go there. I went to Bolivia.
Very different.
Which was, pretty different, pretty cool. I had taken like 4 years of Spanish in high school. And at this time too, I was like going out with the sister missionaries all the time. And like our family, we did have a really strong connection to missionaries. Like we always had them over for dinner. We lived about an hour from Columbus, Ohio, which was like where the mission like home was and whatever. So like my mom would always drive like the sister missionaries over for like their transfers. And like, we just always like had missionary, like I was really comfortable and familiar with the missionaries.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, growing up for me, my both of my parents served their missions in Oaxaca, Mexico, which arguably is probably one of the most rural states in Mexico, especially in the 90s when they served their missions. So I grew up hearing their stories like of a really, really rough missions, with a lot of scarcity and like people being really poor and them struggling, like the amount of walking they had to do, the hills they had to, walk to visit people, and words being tiny and small, and maybe sometimes even starting the branches themselves. What was your idea? Because obviously, being in the United States, going out with missions would be drastically different than a country like Bolivia. What was your idea of I guess you had an idea of what missionaries do, but was it, once you got there, was it shocking for you? Like just the, just, not just maybe the weather, but just like even the culture, how the poverty in the country, and just like a culture shock, was it, and combined with missionary work, was there anything you can talk about that?
Yeah, there was definitely a culture shock. Well, I guess I'll talk first about like my initial reaction, like when I got my mission call.
Yeah.
I didn't really have like a deep understanding of what like living in Bolivia would be like. I like searched and found some like missionary blogs of like sister missionaries who are like in my mission or like in Bolivia, and I was like reading and like, oh, like this is so cool, like doing my little research. But I think overall I was just like excited. I wasn't thinking like I knew like people would say like, oh, missions are like hard or whatever, but I was kind of thinking like, yeah, like it's fine, like because I was always like an overachiever and like always like,
okay,
yeah, so I was just kind of like, yeah, like I'll be fine. Like I felt super confident and I was like, God's gonna provide, like I feel good.
Sorry,
yeah.
I didn't finish that story, but I always felt like that was my fault, but didn't complete my thought, but I always felt like I had an advantage as a missionary because I already knew what I was going to than some of the missionaries, especially American missionaries, who would come with this idealistic, idea of what the mission was going to be, and they were very disappointed and would struggle a lot on their missions. Anyway, so
yeah, I think that we at the time too, our like stake and the like Columbus, Ohio mission, we did like mini missions. So there was like one during the summer for like a week, we went and like lived with like a set of missionaries and like went out and like proselyted and like,
wow.
We just like lived in their apartment with them. And for sisters, since the age had just changed, there weren't that many sister missionary companionships yet, but there were a ton of young women who like wanted to go on missions. So I was like, I don't know, 17 or 18. And there was one set of sister missionaries and there were 4 young women from the stake that we were paired with them. So there were like 6 of us in their apartment. And so I kind of was like loosely familiar with like
the
day-to-day of like, of missionaries and like the handbook and stuff like that. And it was definitely different than I was expecting going in the mini mission, but that really prepared me to kind of have an understanding of what I would be doing as a missionary. And I think at the time, I was mostly like, I don't know any scriptures. Like, and I can use the pamphlets to like teach or whatever, but like, there's like the Spirit will like tell you in the moment, like the perfect scripture to share that will be related. And I'm like, the Spirit can't tell me if I don't know. So I think that was like I wasn't super worried about like where I was going.
Okay.
I felt like God called me there. So like wherever I go, I'll be fine. But I was like, I don't know anything. So that was kind of more what I was
worried about.
Yeah.
What about when you actually got there? What was your experience like?
Yeah. So when I actually got there, so first I went to the MTC.
Yeah, I was going to ask.
Yeah. I went to the MTC in Bogota, Colombia.
Oh, wow. So you were straight in.
Yes. Yeah. And I was there for 6 weeks. The first 4 weeks I had a MTC companion who was from the United States. And then the last 2 weeks I had a companion who was from Bolivia. So she like only spoke Spanish. And it was like really one of the first times where I was like around a lot of like LDS young adults. So kind of like Lexi mentioned earlier, whenever we were like looking at the elders, like, Like, why were you called to our ward if not to marry me? You know what I'm saying? Like, God put us together. So I thought that about like basically every elder I ever met on my mission. Like, this could be my husband. Because I also didn't have that, like, there's kind of like a stigma in largely like Mormon areas of like people who like met on their mission and got married. I did not have that. I was like, I'm going to meet my husband on my mission. Like, there's all these like young like men.
Yeah. And I feel
there's
like
none in Ohio. So this is where I got to go, you know?
And I feel like it's become more that way. Like the amount of people since the age change, the amount of people meeting on missions and maybe even people going on missions with the same hopes of like finding a partner. I feel like that's maybe more typical now.
Yeah. So, but I had, during my classes in MTC, I had a lot of fun. I was like joking around all the time, like with the other missionaries and like, but whenever I would have like any time to just kind of be like alone with my thoughts, I was like, what am I doing here? Like this is like, and I actually, so I had been like every time we would have like morning, like, prayer, like all together, like the missionaries would get together and we'd like sing hymns and like whatever, like in the chapel. I didn't understand anything because it was all in Spanish. So I just feel like thinking. And then like the MTC president would like look over and I'm like crying, like, I miss my mom. And so I actually, got to call my mom while I was in the MTC because the MTC president was like, hey, Sister Wingate, like, it seems like you're having a hard time. Like,
and let's just remind everybody that at the time it was only emails once a week, right?
Right. Yeah. It was only emails once a week.
The only kind of communication you had with your family for an entire year and a half, except for Mother's Day and Christmas, right?
It's a big deal that they you must have been quite sad.
And I did not tell anybody. I was like, yeah, I'm strong with you guys. Like, but yeah, he was like, do you need to call your mom? Because like you're having a hard time. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So he let me call my mom. So that was nice. But yeah, so another thing that was like really shocking to me though in the MTC, the MTC president would have like Sunday firesides only with the North American missionaries. So it was like our only kind of meeting that was like only in English. And he would talk to us about like deep doctrine kind of stuff. So not just like faith in Jesus Christ and like whatever, but about like polygamy and about like what's it called? That's like what we were before we were spirits. Intelligences. I had never heard of that. And I was kind of like, what? I was like, wait, hang on. So God didn't create us. He just made our spirits, but we existed before as intelligences.
Co-eternal with God. The stick of Joseph,
so I was
guys loved that one too.
I was like, so God didn't create us? Like, what am I doing here? Like, I was just like, I was like, I just had no idea.
We missed your first going through the temple. When did that happen?
Oh, yeah. I went through the temple right before I left on my mission to the Columbus, Ohio temple. And
how was that?
It was like interesting, but I think so there was I didn't understand like anything that was like going on.
Yeah.
But my mom was with me. A bunch of people from my ward came. And I remember, so one of the people, she was kind of like a mentor to me. Just like a woman from our ward who like I'm still friends with, and I like babysat her kids when they lived in our ward, and she told me before that like her first time going through the temple, she like got so nervous that she like couldn't stop laughing, and I was like, oh, that's kind of like, oh, that's interesting. And then there was like a part, I was sitting next to my mom, and there was a part in the ceremony where like all the men like raised their hands, and my mom like raised her hand, and I was like, and then she was like, oh, and so then I was like laughing, but then I like couldn't stop laughing. So me and my mom are just like laughing like in the temple ceremony. But yeah, I don't know. I didn't see it. And later I like thought like, I wish I had a better understanding of like what I was doing.
Yeah.
'Cause I felt like I was missing out on like understanding my special ordinance because
Were you like, what is this? Because the temple has nothing to do with what you do on Sundays, right? Like,
yeah, I was just kind of like, this is what I have to do to go on a mission. So like, I didn't think too much about it. I was like, all right, like I'm going to go through the temple. I'm going to get garments and then I'm going to go on my mission. And I felt like, I was like, I'm glad that I'm doing this before I go on a mission and not like right before I get married, because I felt like getting married wasn't as like a spiritual experience as going on a mission. So I was like, I'm going to do this church thing. Yeah. So I felt, and I guess like the rhetoric that I had heard about the temple was like, I learn more about the temple every time I go. And I was like, well, this is my first time. So I guess next time I'll learn something. Like, you know, like, yeah, I just kind of had that mindset of like, I'm not going to understand it. So like, whatever. Like,
sorry to go back, but we can go back to where you were. We were
in the MTC. Yeah. So and the next like several times I went to the temple were in Spanish, because then the next time I went was in the MTC. It was on Spanish. I didn't understand anything. So I didn't really even understand what was being said until like the end of my mission, when I could speak Spanish and was like, oh, this is like interesting. Like, you know, but yeah, so in the MTC president would like have these like deep doctrine talks with us. He like told us stories about like people getting excommunicated. And I was like, what does excommunicated mean? And they're like, oh, like you get kicked out of the church. And I was like, why would we kick people out of the church? Like, I just was like so blown away. But then I was like, oh, like I'm already here. Like I can't, I'm like in Colombia. Like, I can't, like I can't leave. So,
well, you also on a mission, it's fascinating to me that the mission president was teaching those things. But I also was thinking, I learned a lot of things on my mission, whether just from people I was talking to as a missionary, or my mission president actually taught. My mission president was the one who taught me that there were multiple accounts of the first vision, for example. It's actually a really good time in a lot of ways to teach people these more esoteric, maybe potentially problematic doctrines, because you don't have that much time to really process it. So you kind of just take it for what it is. And also, as you said, you're just missing your mom. You're in a completely new country surrounded by people speaking a language you don't yet know. So even if it's raising these red flags, a mission in some ways is maybe a good time for the church to introduce these topics. I mean, not a good time, but a good time if you want people to just not worry that much about them, because you have bigger fish to fry. You're trying to survive, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But it sounds like the topics that this mission president or MTC president is teaching are more like way orthodox, kind of like way out there, right? Like,
yeah, like he shared, so he was older, and he said that his like grandma was like a polygamist or something, and like his
was it shocking to hear that there's polygamy in the church, or what?
Well, so I also had like a understanding of like that. Of just, I don't know, just people saying the wrong things. Like, so my understanding was that after the Mormons had like moved out west and like all of their like men had died along the way, so they like married women to like take care of them, is not true at all, but it's kind of like something that people say sometimes.
Yeah, that's what I learned.
Yeah. So that's kind of like what I understood. And then I was like, yeah, we don't do it anymore because it's not necessary. Like, and I had like kind of an understanding of like eternal like polygamy, like post-mortis polygamy.
Yeah.
That like unmarried women would like be married to men that already have women's wives or whatever. So, but I just kind of was like, yeah, like it's kind of weird, but like whatever,
We'll
like
figure it out later.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was just like, like whatever, right? So he talked about those things in the MTC, and I started to learn that there were people who were on missions because they felt like social pressure to go on missions. And that was really kind of jarring to me too, because I was like, if you don't want to be here, why are you here? Like, I was very serious. Like, I was like, I'm on a mission because I believe in the church and like, I want to be here. So when, like once I got to my mission and I like was hearing about like all of this like mission gossip about like so-and-so like got in trouble or they got emergency transferred because they were like going on dates with girls or they were like playing video games all day. And I was like, what? Like, why are they here? Like, I didn't have that like concept of like pressure because from our home ward, the last missionary who had gone out was like, he got home while I was in the MTC. So it had been like 2 years and there were like eligible like young men who could have gone on missions who like didn't. So I was just like, if you don't want to go on a mission, don't go. Like, why are you like wasting my time? Like basically like, so that was like really shocking for me too, to hear and like to see that not everyone was like taking it as seriously, or I don't know if that's fair to say that they weren't taking it seriously, but they didn't have like the same
conviction.
Yeah, the same conviction. And I didn't understand like the societal pressure in like highly concentrated areas to go on a mission. So that was like pretty shocking for me, I think, as a missionary.
Yeah, because as you were saying, that's kind of your first exposure, right? With Utah Mormons, Idaho Mormons, California Mormons, the Mormons that come from these high concentration pockets. So you're probably slowly learning like, wait a second, this is different in many ways from the type of Mormonism that maybe you grew up with.
Yeah. So I had also like never been to Utah, like, or I had never, like I didn't even go to like the Provo MTC. Like this was like my first like time where I was in like a space that was like highly concentrated with Mormon people. And like, content warning, but like people from Utah can be super annoying. So like I was like
trigger warning.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was like, yeah, I get it. Your snow's great and like fry sauce and like whatever. Like so I was just like around all these people all the time who were like getting homesick for this like shared experience that they had that I didn't have. And I was like,
companions will always mention grass. Like he missed grass.
Yeah, I'm like,
oh, that was so me. That's so funny.
Yeah, or one of my areas in Bolivia was like, it was like way super far out from like the rest of the mission, and it was like in this like red rock area, and everyone was like, "Oh my gosh, it looks like St. George," and I'm like, I don't even know what St. George is. Like, like I just was like, I don't know, always kind of like, you guys are annoying. Like,
yeah. And just how tiny that world is, but how to Utah Mormons, that feels like the world. That just feels like, I mean, yeah, I complained about not being able to eat Cafe Rio my whole mission, but I was mostly with Utah Mormons, you know? So yeah, I didn't even think about how grating that probably is for people who are like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, I'm like, oh my gosh. But actually fry sauce is so delicious. So
you get it.
Yeah, I get it. I take that one back, but everything else.
Yeah.
What was your mission experience like as far as the missionary work? How would you characterize being a missionary in Bolivia? Back to some of those questions Gerardo was asking, like how did you adjust when you were out in the field? What was it like?
Yeah, I feel like in Latin America, like there's like really large Catholic population. So most of the folks that we talked to were like, we'd be like, do you want to talk about Jesus Christ? And they're like, yeah, I'm Christian. Like, and we could just talk to people super easily. And I didn't have to do a lot of like back and forth, like trying to prove anything. Cause we were like starting on the same page. Like, yeah, we believe in Jesus Christ. Like, so I kind of feel like in that way, a lot of people didn't even realize we were like trying to sell them something different.
Yeah. And Latino culture is not skeptical. Sometimes, especially, you know, when they are in lower economical classes. My experience was that people would just believe. I mean, whether they would do it and go to church was different. But if you're just telling them, yeah, there was this guy in the U.S. who received some golden plates, they'll just, oh, that's cool.
Yeah, exactly. They're like, oh, they were just like, thanks, sisters, like whatever. Or I would like be talking in lessons and I could like tell that they're like zoning out, but I'm like, I gotta say my piece, you know, like I gotta go through the script. And so I feel like overall, I wish that I had like focused more on just like meeting people and like connecting with them and like learning from them. But instead I was like 19 years old saying like, no, like you don't need to sell your goods in the market on Sundays because you can just come to church and then you'll be blessed. Like, even though I have no understanding of like running a household or like working a job for a living.
The financial situation.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'm just like, what do you like? Just have faith. Like, these people don't have faith. Like, with just like no understanding of how life works. So I do think I did get sick a lot on my mission. And my first transfer, I was like in the hospital for like a week. And I ended up like, I had like giardia, just like kind of like parasites. And I lost like a lot of weight. And yeah, I was just like really, really sick. And when I spoke with my mission president after, he was like, yeah, like Sister Wingate, like I heard that you were sick, like you were like not feeling good. And I was like, yeah, I was in the hospital for a week. Like, yeah, I was not feeling good. And he was like, yeah, sometimes when people get like homesick or they get kind of sad, it can like make them not feel good. And I was like, that can be true for sure. Like, I don't know if that's relevant to what happened to me. Like,
I literally have giardia, but
yeah, okay. Exactly. Yeah. But it was kind of like
condescending.
Yeah. But obviously at the time I didn't take it that way. I was like, well, I kind of did actually. I was kind of like, no, like I was actually sick. Like on top of that, maybe like, yeah, I'm like homesick and like whatever, but like it was like
actual sick.
Yeah, I was like actually sick. Like I couldn't like eat anything, and like I lost like 50 pounds in like a week. Like, I don't know if that's the exact measurements, but I was like visibly like smaller.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I like, when I like on P Day, I like wrote to my mom, like, hey, I was in the hospital for a week. And she's like, why didn't I know that you were in the hospital for a week? Like, and nobody in my family had gone on a mission before. So my mom was like, you should come home. Like, oh, sorry, I shouldn't have.
You're good.
But she's like, you wanted me to come home. And I was like, no way. Like, I'm
doing this thing.
Yeah, I'm doing my thing. So that was kind of like a theme during my mission, that I just like kept like getting sick. And at one point I like was really thinking about going home. But I felt like,
because of the sickness, or
yeah, because I just like kept getting sick. And like, I also have like in my patriarchal blessing, there's like a line that says like that I would be like blessed with like health to like do everything I need to do in this life. And I was like, why does it say that when I'm not healthy? Like I keep getting sick. And we had some like mission rules where like we weren't supposed to eat food like on the street. We weren't supposed to eat like pork or lettuce or strawberries because they had like higher like infection rates for like sickness and stuff. And we weren't supposed to drink the water. And I like followed all of the rules. I never like did anything, but I just kept getting sick. So I was like kind of having this like disconnect of like, why was I given this like promise that I will be healthy for like everything I need to do? but I keep getting sick. So I had talked to my mission president about like potentially going home early. And he was like, yeah, just like think about it. And he gave me like a time to like call him back like at a later date to like tell him what I had decided. And then I was like, yeah, I'm going to stay. Like I decided to stay in part because I felt like a lot of pressure as like the first missionary in my family. And I felt like if like my sister wanted to go on a mission in the future, I was like, if I come home early from my mission, like, I don't think my sister will go on a mission, like, cause it'll like leave a bad taste or whatever, or like she'll go out, but she'll come home early too. Or like, I just felt like I really needed to push through like for that.
And it sounds like your ward was so excited for you to go out, which is wonderful. But did you feel like that added to the pressure, like the ward community having invested in you going on a mission and things like that?
Yeah, I think for sure too. And like my friends who like, most of my friends were not members of the church. And they were like what? You're doing this like.
Why are you here? Why are you back?
Yeah, exactly. They were like, well, like when I did come back, they're like, how was your trip? And I'm like, my trip. Like, wow. Yeah, but I also kind of felt like I needed to do the thing that I said I was going to do, because all of my friends are like sad that they're not going to see me for a year and a half, and they like can't talk to me. And like, and I had a lot of friends who would like email me on my mission and like update me about stuff that was happening, and which was like so sweet. And I feel like being on a mission, like at kind of like a young formative age where most of my friends were not members of the church, really like put a lot of strain on like my relationships and my friendships. And a lot of them like didn't make it through like me being on a mission, where like other people who were like there were some people in my mission who like went to high school together. And I was like, that's like so wild to me that like you're with like one of your classmates like on your mission, where like my classmates and my friends, like they barely understand what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So I kind of felt that like pressure to like complete my whole mission, to kind of be an example of like, what do missions look like?
Totally.
And like, yeah. So.
Yeah, I didn't think about how hard that would be to have your peers all just also moving on with their lives, going to school, having all these experiences, how much more difficult that could maybe make a mission experience, which is already difficult. You're already getting sick all the time. That would be really challenging. I'm wondering, Lexi, did you pick up on any of this? Were you hearing stories? Were you two still in close contact? What was it like for you while Sydney was gone on the mission?
Yeah, honestly, when Sydney was on her mission, this is like what kind of made our relationship. Because like I mentioned before, when I was younger and I was just doing things because my older sister was doing it, I feel like it gave us time to actually communicate, because like even I may have not been the best at emailing her every week, but I tried, and I feel like we were able to have conversations. And like she wouldn't tell me all of these things about like her being sick, or she would just be like, hey, yeah, I got sick this last week. And then I had my mom like in the next room being like, oh my God, like Sydney's in the hospital, like I want her to come home. And I'm like, oh yeah, like Sydney's saying that she's having fun, like sharing scriptures with me. And like while she was on her mission, that's when I started to actually be like stronger in the church, because I wanted to know like, what is she teaching? Like, why is she doing what she's doing? Like, why did my sister just leave for a year and a half? And like, I wanted to explain that to my friends and be like, yeah, my older sister, she's in Cochabamba, Bolivia. She's on a mission. She's teaching this and this and this. She's doing this. Like, it gave me a testimony at the time where I was just like, yeah, like missionary work this is what like we all should be doing. Like, I want to do this. Like, I want to be like my sister. Like, she's so strong, and she's so spiritual, and she's so amazing, which she is now to this day too. But it was just it was like exciting to see, but she was not sharing all of the big things with me. Because I remember like there was a couple like missionaries in her mission that I would email to, and it was just like a lot of like hee hee ha ha on a younger sister perspective.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, you kind of curate who you're telling what, obviously, right? You don't want to tell your little sister maybe all of the hard parts, or I feel like even me as a missionary, I was doing revisionist history in my mind as I was living it, because you're so trained to say, well, this is, a challenge from God, and what am I supposed to learn from this? It's really interesting to process what can be traumatic as a missionary when you have all this messaging telling you, like, no, this isn't trauma. This is God giving you a trial so you can learn and grow and all the things. Is there anything else you want to say about your mission before we get to you coming home, and then kind of what that switch was? Because then Lexi ended up going on a mission.
Yeah. So another thing that really sticks with me from my mission is so I was on my mission from February of 2014 to August of 2015. And two kind of big things were happening in the United States at that time, which we weren't getting a ton of news, right? Because you're really secluded from what's going on in the world as a missionary, because your access to information is very limited. You can only consume church media and books and music, and in your emails you're encouraged to share about your experiences here and send hope and faith home, But one of my friends, who was not a member of the church, had emailed me about kind of the start of the Black Lives Matter movement. And he was like, yeah, it's really wild. They're police forces that are have tanks that are going against protesters, and there's fires and stuff. And I was like, oh my gosh, I had not heard any of this. This is so wild. And I felt as a white person in a largely indigenous cultured country, and as a North American or a United States citizen in another country, I should be aware of what's going on, especially with racial tensions in the United States. And a lot of people in Bolivia saw the Mormon church as an American church, a United States church. So I was why don't we know anything about this? If someone comes to me and is yeah, Americans are racist and they're being harmful, right now, there's these protests happening. I was just why hasn't anyone let us know that? Because it kind of seems relevant to the scape of
what
our
you're
existence.
doing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The other thing that happened was that in the United States, gay marriage was legalized. And for that, we had an emergency zone conference. Our mission president gave us all of these talking points, how to let people know that even though in the United States gay marriage is legal, we still believe that marriage is between a man and a woman, and how to use these talking points to talk about the family and all these things. And I still was all my gay friends were writing me every week and telling me how they're doing and giving me motivation and checking in on me. So I was why are we having this emergency zone meeting to talk about
why gay people shouldn't get married?
Yeah, exactly. And I always I still had my I believe that God knows our hearts, and he knows our situations, and why would God make people gay and expect them to just suffer their whole lives by trying to fit into a mold that they weren't, the mold was not made for them, I also felt on my mission, I was I'll probably teach gay people, because that's part of my ministry, of being in the church and being open is I can be a safe place for them to land and learn about the true gospel, from me, who will be nice and gentle to them about it. And yeah, so that was like really interesting to me as a missionary, where I was like, there's a lot of big things happening in the United States right now. Why are we focusing so much on like making sure everyone knows that we don't want gay people to get married? Like, yeah.
And why was there not a similar response for the Black Lives Matter movement of let's talk about, how important it is to make sure that people know they're included regardless of race, et cetera, et cetera. It's seemed pretty clear what the priority was and what triggered that response.
And not to be like super political here, but wasn't Trump running around that time? And then there was because I remember being on a mission around the same time, probably around the same years. And then all the Mexicans would come to us because I always had American missionary companions, and they would come to us and say, isn't the candidate that's running for president like racist and against Mexicans? And so it was kind of interesting to get that. That was what people would come to us to talk about and get our opinions, because we had a white American missionary that could probably talk to them about it. But did you get some of that?
So when I came home was the first that I heard about Donald Trump running for president. Okay. So like I was like hanging out with some of my friends, and they were like updating me about like things that were happening. So one of my friends, he was like, okay, so like these nuts jokes are back. At the time there was this like other internet trend that was like, what are those? Like when you like you like point to somebody's shoes that like are like weird, and you go like, what are those? So they were updating me on like really important internet meme culture. And then the same friend, he was like, also Donald Trump is running for president. And I was like, oh, ha ha ha. And he's like, no, he's actually like kind of doing really well and like saying like a lot of like weird stuff. And I was like, oh, he's like, like has a chance to like,
oh gosh,
like people are taking him seriously. So that was like the first time that I had ever heard like in my debriefing, like with my friends, they're like, oh yeah, by the way,
catching you up on all the things.
Yeah, exactly. But
do you feel like you say you're having these experiences, noticing these things, these reactions, do you feel like coming home from your mission, where was your faith at the time? Were you still very strong believing? Do you feel like there were these things were making you question the truth of the church, or was it just things you had kind of noticed? Like, if you could sum up what place you were at coming home from your mission after having experienced all of that, where were you at?
Excellent question. I was extremely indoctrinated. Like I was like, in a way I would say like self-righteous, like, and like I went home and like my mom and my sister were like on a Sunday, like, we're going to go get McDonald's. Like, do you want anything? And I was like, no, I don't want anything. It's Sunday. Like, I don't want anything from McDonald's. Like, like I was just like, and I felt really strongly that I needed to get married, which is like a flip from like what was previously important to me. I felt like I needed to get married. I needed to get married quickly. I came home. I like did another semester at like the local university, and then I transferred to BYU-Idaho. And I was just like really like, I need to start a family so I can like raise them in the church, and I need to do my calling, and I need to like start dating and like read my scriptures every day. And like I really for a while I wanted to like keep my same like missionary like routine, because I was like, before my mission I wasted all this time like resting, like, or like doing nothing,
sleeping in.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm like, I need to like I just was like really like hyped up to like do all my callings. And like when I came home, I was going to 3 wards. Like I was going to my family ward, and then I was going to the Spanish like branch for their services, and then I was going to the YSA.
Oh wow.
Like a town over. Like wow. And I was like going out with the missionaries all the time, and like I really like wanted to keep up my like momentum that I had like
Yeah, gained on the
learned-
mission.
Yeah, gained on the mission. So yeah, I was like super like,
So
Yeah.
when you got to BYU-Idaho, you felt right at home then with everyone being members of the church and
I wanted to, and I was like, and everyone was like, you're gonna go on like so many dates and like whatever. And then I got there, and it was like, we talked about before how like there's not that same like camaraderie as like when I was in Ohio. Like at the YSA, I went on a date with everyone I wanted to go on a date with. To say that, and then I also. Yeah, just like everyone was like, you're great. Like you came home from a mission. We love you. And then I went to BYU-Idaho and everyone's kind of like, okay, like we all just
Everyone
got home
went
from
on
our
a mission.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Doesn't
So
set you apart.
I felt like I had pretty high expectations. I'd be like going on all these dates and like having like so much fun. And yeah, that wasn't really my experience. I also struggled a lot when I was still in Ohio before I went to BYU-Idaho, like reconnecting with some of my friends who weren't Mormon. Like I had a friend who had invited me over, and then she was having people over to like drink and like hang out. And I was like, okay, I have to go home because like I don't drink. And one of her friends was like, well, can't you just like drink and like repent? And I was like, no, like that's not really how it works. And like, but like when I left, I was like crying because I felt so like, oh, like I can't like hang out with my friend and like I can't relate to them anymore. And like they're doing things that just like aren't in my values. So I felt really like isolated from like my non-member friends. And then also like in the YSA, I had a couple instances of like men being very like creepy towards me, like in the church. So like I had one guy who like had messaged me like a few times to like go on dates. And I was like, no, like I'm not like interested, but he would like never talk to me at church. And one time we, so my sister and I and my mom and the sister missionaries were like at our house, like having dinner. And Lexi like looks out the front window and like says the name of this guy who had been messaging me. And I was like, why did you say that person's name? Like, that's like really strange. And she's like, because he's outside. And he was like walking by our house. And I was like, oh my gosh, she's like coming to the door to like ask me on a date or something because I'm like not saying yes when he asked me on Facebook, I guess. That's what I was thinking. So I was like, I'm going to go upstairs, like tell him I'm not home. But then he doesn't come to the front door. And then you see like he goes out of vision, and we lived in like a cul-de-sac, like a court. And then you see him like walk up the other side of the court and like leave. Like he just like walked by our house, which he knows where our house is because he has like church access to like church
records.
Yeah, because everyone
find where you
has
live.
everyone's
Yeah.
address and stuff. So that was like really kind of like unsettling.
And it's not like he lived right next to us. He was walking, and it probably would have taken him like an hour and a half or 2 hours to walk from his house to our
Oh my
house.
gosh.
So it wasn't
Wasn't a
close
coincidence.
proximities,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah. And then the other experience I had was I had gone on a date with this guy who was like a little bit older. I met him at the YSA, and he said like he served his mission in Salt Lake City, and he like had a business in Dayton, Ohio. And we like went on a date, and it was like fine, but I was like, all right, like that. It was like my first date, like home from my mission. And after he like told everyone in the ward that he was like in love with me and that he like thought I was the one. And I was like, that's not like, sorry, like that's not really how I like experienced it. And he kept like, we like stopped like talking, but then he kept like trying to like find other ways to like talk to me. So he was like, oh, like I'm having trouble with my roommates. Like I just need somebody to talk to. And his roommates were like members of our ward too. And And I was like, I'm not the person for you to talk to about this. Like, but he was just like really pushing and like kept trying to talk to me. And then eventually it kind of like fizzled out. But within the last year, this person had like a Dateline like episode come out about them.
Oh, wow.
That they're like actually like a huge like predator.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And like my mom like sent me a screenshot and was like, is this the guy you went on a date with? And I was like, yeah, it is. And she's like, yeah, he's on Dateline NBC, like under the title that he's under, you know? And, but in his Dateline episode, they didn't mention anything about him being a member of the church. They didn't mention him going on a mission. So I'm thinking he's not a member of the church. He didn't go on a mission. And he was just like in our ward, like trying to go on dates with like women and like, I guess had learned like what you need to say to sound like a good like member of the church. Like, yeah, I started a mission and like whatever. And it makes me curious that like none of the leadership of the YSA were like, hey, this guy didn't serve a mission. Like we actually don't even have his records. Like who is this person who's in a YSA with like 18 to 29-year-olds?
Yeah, vulnerable women.
Yeah, yes, yeah. So, that was kind of like a theme when I was like home from my mission, where of like men kind of
Creepy.
being creepy. And I was like, what the heck? I gotta go to BYU-Idaho to like find my husband because this is not for me. Like, yeah. So
Wow. How long from when you were home until you went on your mission, Lexi? Like, how much did you overlap with each other before you left?
I think a year and a half.
Yeah, maybe
because
2 years.
she got back my senior year in high school, and then I went right when I turned 19. So she went to BYU-Idaho, and then when I graduated high school, I also attended BYU-Idaho for just a semester together, and then I left May of 2017 for my mission.
Got it. And what led you to want to go on a mission? Was it mainly your sister going, or how did you make that decision?
Like, she had a lot of influence on that because I really thought my sister was so cool, and I think also being at like BYU-Idaho at the time where a lot of my friends that I made were like returned missionaries, or there was a lot of excitement about people going on missions. And I was just like, all right, like this is for me too, I guess. Like, and I remember talking to like Sydney one night. She had just gotten home from work because we lived together for a minute out there. And I was like, I think I'm going to go on a mission. And she was like, okay, absolutely. And I started telling people, I was like, I'm going to go on a mission. I'm going to start my papers. Like, and it all happened really quickly because I think I opened like my mission papers at BYU-Idaho in like March, and I left May 10th for my mission. So it was all like quick. And so I didn't really have time to think about anything. And I remember like after the end of the semester, we had like a week and a half for me to like receive my endowments. And so we all like went to Ohio to do it through the Ohio Columbus Temple because it had to be quick. And I remember my mom being stressed because the temple workers were telling her like, she's not going to be able to get it in time. And my mom was like, well, she's leaving for her mission. Like she has to get it. And I like, it was really stressful because I, again, didn't really understand what I was doing. Like I had, at this rate, like had learned more. I've like read the first chapter of the Book of Mormon like 12 times. Like that was as much as I needed to know at the time. Yeah. Right. And I got my mission call and I was just really excited. I remember like telling my friends, I was like, I have these garments now. And people were like, I don't know what that is. And I'm like, it's a sacred covenant that I made to God. Like I have different underwear. Like I'm so excited. And people were just like, okay, cool. Like don't, why are you talking about your underwear to me?
Yeah.
And then I went to the MTC. So it was just a very quick, like I had the thought, but when Sydney was leaving for her mission, she kind of had like months to prepare after she got her mission call. And I thought I would have the same thing, but it was just like, you got to go.
Just really quick.
Yeah.
Did you have a similar experience in the temple? Was it strange to you at all, or did you just take it for what it was on the path to getting out on your mission?
I took it for what it was.
It sounds like you took it as like, oh, I'm being allowed into the secret club, right?
Yeah, I felt really cool that I got to do it, and my mom's already done it. My sister's already done it. And like, I had this best friend at BYU-Idaho, and he was like telling me to prepare for some things in the temple that didn't happen. So I was like prepared for the worst of things that don't exist. And I've learned later on that's like the tall tale that you tell people scary things. So for me, like the temple, I remember we went at like 7 a.m. So I was just trying to stay awake the whole time. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't really understand what was happening. And it's like, no one prepared me that it was a long session.
Yeah, it is long.
2 hours.
Yeah. Totally. So you go through the temple. It's this kind of fast track to the mission. Where did you get called, and what was your mission experience like?
So I got called to the California Redlands Mission, which is now the California San Bernardino Mission. I remember like getting to the MTC, or before we even got into the MTC, it was like me, my sister, and my mom. We were all out here in Provo, Utah. And it was like the morning I was supposed to go, and I was like, I don't want to go. And my mom and my sister were like, no, you got to go. It's going to be so fun. I was like, I don't want to go. Obviously, I went because here I am now, a returned missionary. But I went into the MTC, and it was just like so much all at once, like where I'm like smiling and like running through basically, because you had stations you had to stop by and grab all of your like supplies and your books. And then all of a sudden I like sat in my seat in the like classroom I was going to be for the next 3 weeks. And I was just like, I'm here. Like, there's nothing I can do. Like, I am kind of stuck. And then like an elder walked in, and he was just like, hey, I'm elder. I don't remember anyone's name, but he said, I'm elder so-and-so. And I was just like, yeah, like I'm Sister Wingate. Like, I'm going to the California Redlands Mission. And they all went to like, everyone in my district, none of us went to the same mission. We all went to very different ones. But they were all in California. And I remember being in a trio, and one of my companions, she was from Tennessee and like also a convert to the church and grew up with a single father. And so we bonded. Like, we were inseparable. Like, we were doing everything together. But we did have a companion who was from Utah, grew up with it. And she always felt like we were leaving her out, but we didn't mean to. But it was just like, we're not from Utah. This is not our home. And then we make it to the mission field. Like, the MTC was fun, enjoyed it. It was weird, but it was fun. Mm-hmm. And then I get to the mission field in California. And I would say like my mission was pretty rough. I didn't get sick like Sydney, but I did have a lot of like mental struggles. And I remember like I would always be like emailing my mom and my sister and just being like, I can't do it. Like, I don't know what's going on. Like, my companions are really mean. And it got to the point that like I realized that I was being put, because I'm very loud. I'm very talkative. Like, if someone looks at me, I'm going to talk. And I realized that my companions kept being these quiet sister missionaries who had like struggled with depression their whole mission. And it felt like a chore. Like, it was my job to get them to be social, to get them to have success, and to like be able to communicate with people, which at the same time didn't really feel like it was my responsibility, because I was just like, yeah, like I was called to this mission to be me because I'm loud and I'm vocal. Like, why am I not getting companions like this? And my mission president was always just like, oh, like, I just, you know, the revelation tells me you need to be with this sister. But it's like, is it revelation, or are you seeing this sister be quiet and you want them to have success, so you're putting them with a loud sister missionary?
So you felt like you were continually put in positions where you were kind of having to take care of a sister who was struggling, who was maybe struggling to do missionary work because of their personality, their disposition. And I can imagine that takes a huge toll when you feel like you're always the one kind of having to carry the missionary work, the conversations.
Yeah. Because I did have a couple areas where it was like never like, the sister missionaries. It would be like, Sister Wingate's here, because I was the only one who would talk. And it's like, at the same time, I was struggling with my own mental health, where I had to go to like the church's services. I don't really remember what it was called.
Family services.
Family services, where like I had to meet with like a therapist, and they put me on antidepressants, and they like reached out to my mom, and they're like, okay, like your daughter's on antidepressants, like she's going to be doing good. And my mom was like, if she's depressed, like bring her home. And they're like, no, like the antidepressants are going to work for her. And I also just remember, like, I have always been very, like, reactive. Like, I may not always make the proper choice, or I may not go like about situations in the most proper way, and especially being a missionary where we're like held to this standard, I still would be very reactive, and sometimes I would cause arguments with my companions, which not fair to them. And I would just like be so sad all the time or so irritated, or sometimes I would just be good and I'm happy and I'm enjoying being a missionary. And I remember like talking to my mission president's wife, and she was just like, well, Sister Wingate, like as women, we are all just like emotional, and we always, you know, like we can get sad about little things that may not be a big deal. Like, do you think you're just being over emotional? And I was just like, tears like streaming down my face. And I was like, yeah, maybe I'm just a woman being emotional. And it's like later on in my life, I have found out like I am diagnosed bipolar disorder. So during my mission, it was like, I'm undiagnosed at this rate, but they were more towards like, hey, you need to pray more. You need to like find more faith. Like you need to be more obedient. Like, are you waking up right at 6:30? Like maybe that's why you're having a hard time. And it's like, no, like there's other triggers to missions that are like, I'm not getting the help I need, and there's triggers and there's hardships. And I'm not saying that other people haven't had hardships, but I feel like a lot of mission presidents are not equipped to take care of the needs of their missionaries in that source.
Absolutely. Well, and I'm not super familiar, but it sounds like you were not only not diagnosed, but misdiagnosed, and depression is treated differently than bipolar disorder. So you were probably, that could have made it worse. Or, I mean, I guess it just goes to show that the church is not resourced to really properly diagnose people who are having these mental health struggles. And to your point, it makes a lot of sense that if you do have mental health struggles, they're going to be exacerbated or maybe even come out on a mission because there's a lot of triggers to mental health.
Yeah. And I feel like with the specific companions I was set with, like, I feel like even if I ran into them in real life today, they would be a little bit of a harder person to like socialize with and want to have a relationship with. And so the fact that I was with them 24/7 for 6 weeks, sometimes more than 6 weeks, right? Depending on how many transfers I had. But I remember like I was training this one sister missionary, and she hated that I talked to everyone. And I was like, I don't get it. Like, if you want to be a missionary, like, why aren't you talking to people? And she was just like, I want to baptize all these people, but I just hate that you talk to so many people. And I remember being like, sister, like, why don't you think we're getting baptisms? Because again, like on the mission, your success is leveled by how many baptisms you have. And then she was just like, I don't know, like, we're just not getting lessons. And I was like, I'm going to be honest with you, it's you. I'm like, you're not doing great. Like, you should probably go home. Like, and I, at the time, like, I knew that I was being destructive, but I was just like, you can't be a missionary. You can't talk to people. You're annoyed that your trainer is wanting to talk to people. Go home. And that's like my reactive, like I should have not done it. But at the same time, it's like my brain was like, oh, I'm not being a good missionary. And that's why I'm doing this.
And it's a pressure cooker because you're being pressured all the time to constantly have conferences and missionary reunions where you're being told, you need to baptize, numbers. And then you have a mission companion who's like, you feel like it's not helping the situation. Obviously, it's at some point it's gonna explode.
Yeah, it's a psychological, I mean, regardless of where you are on the scale of personality, of mental health struggles, two people living together 24/7, perfect strangers for 6 weeks straight, sometimes 12 weeks, as you said. Regardless, that's an immensely difficult thing to do, not to mention the rigorous schedule, not to mention the pressures. And so I'm just so sorry. That sounds really, really hard to have to deal with while you're dealing with your own mental health and while your mission president is like, oh, this girl's bubbly. Let's send her all the depressed sisters because then, hopefully at least some missionary work will get done. I also think that's a huge problem in missions where young people kind of get tasked with taking care of other young people when nobody should be put in that position anyway. Do you feel like while you're dealing with all of that, was that taking a hit on your beliefs, on your testimony? Were you questioning the church? What was your relationship like with the church through all that?
Yeah, I would say like during this time, because it's like you constantly hear like turn to scripture, turn to prayer. And I was just like, okay, like this is all I have right now. Like I can't just call my mom and be like, I'm sad. But I would like be praying all the time. And I guess like during my mission is when I understood what prayer really was. And I remember being like, oh, I don't have to actually just like get on my knees and close my eyes and say a prayer. It's like I could be driving and say a prayer. And I was just like praying all the time. Like I would wake up like a little bit early so I could like study my scriptures before we had to get out of bed, because I was like, I need something, like I need help, I need guidance. And if this is like what's promised to me, it's going to come eventually. And I probably did that for like 14 months of my mission, like the last 14, where I was just trying so hard to be good, because the first little bit of my mission, I didn't really understand what I was doing. Just like trying to get into the like missionary groove of everything and like just learn what my purpose as a missionary was. And I feel like something that was hard for me is like I felt like I never really got an answer. And I hate to say this, but it did kind of make me like angry. And so I would always tell my mission president, I'd be like, hey, like I was praying and I have this feeling that I should be in this area. Or hey, like I was praying about this, like I think this should be the next step in my mission. And every single time that would happen, because I said, oh, I got revelation for myself, I'm going to let you know. And I guess the stars aligned and he had the same revelation as me, but.
Yeah, crazy. So that kind of makes you wonder probably about how all of this works. Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like I saw a lot of my companions like probably should have gone home from their missions, because I think the three things, it's like if they're a harm to themselves, harm to somebody else, or they just cannot do missionary work, they like had to go home. And my mission president really like did everything he could to keep his missionaries there. And everyone would be like, oh yeah, like mission president and wife, they're here specifically because they have like this knowledge in mental health. And it's like, oh, like that's so cool. But now that I'm looking back on it, I'm like, did they really have as much information as we thought? Because we put a lot of faith in them. And like even towards the end of my mission, I had a companion who she could not do missionary work. Like we had to keep, like we made a rule that we had to be an arm's distance away from each other at all time, because like I would go up and talk to people and I'd be like, hi, I'm Sister Wingate and this is my companion, who was like not even by my side. And she had like suicidal ideations and she had homicidal ideations.
Oh my gosh.
Which when
That's crazy.
I remember my mission president telling me about that and I was like, I'm so sorry, homicidal?
Oh, gosh.
And I was like, she should go home. And he was just like, no, like her life is better here than it would be back home. And I was just like, I don't know where in the world that you are putting like other missionaries, like sister missionaries, in danger. I'm like, even if she just said it to say it, or if it is true, I'm like, that is not a chance that you should be willing to take. And I remember just like every night being like so scared as I go to sleep, because I was like, if she has these tendencies, like anything could happen. In this moment.
Well, and you're living alone. You don't have any sort of protection. You're sharing a room, right? So if someone is having homicidal ideations, it's likely, you know, you're continually in vulnerable positions with that person. That's so scary.
Yes. And I remember telling my mom about it, and my mom like calling my mission president and being like, hello, like, why is this happening? And he was just like, no, like Sister Wingate's okay. Like I've talked to her, like we got things under control. So my mission president telling my mom one thing where it's like, I'm emailing her and being like, this is not good. This is not a good situation. I don't.
Oh gosh, that's so scary. And also just probably causes you to wonder, why are so many people having such a difficult time with their mental health? And I mean, maybe I'm projecting now, but I remember thinking that on my mission, like nobody seems like they're doing very well. And if this is what we're all supposed to be doing, and this is what God wants from us, then why does everybody seem so depressed? Like even the missionaries that were doing okay were still like some level of depression, it felt like, at least. So yeah, I can imagine that makes you take a step back and wonder about lots of things when you feel like you're doing what you need to be doing, but not only you, but so many people around you seem to be struggling so immensely and not getting the resources they need to help them.
Yeah. I remember like in our mission, it was like a big no-no of like elders and sisters talking. We had a very like...
What? That's crazy.
I don't know if something had happened. I never asked. I was just like, oh, okay, elders and sisters don't talk in the mission. I never questioned it, and I just kept going. And I remember like it getting to the point where like elders would be like, hey, Sister Wingate, like, are you doing okay? And I'd be like, like you can't talk to me, like you're an elder. But it's like, here's my community, like my active community. And I'm like, I can't even check in with them because we have, like, I was scared. I was scared of being in trouble with my mission president. I was scared of like not being obedient on my mission. But at the same time, this is like all I had to check in with. And I just like couldn't do it.
Oof, that's intense. Sounds like a really intense mission culture in a lot of ways too. Like
Yes.
there's always some sort of rules around how you're supposed to interact with missionaries of the opposite sex, but that feels really extreme. So you come home from your mission after all of that. Same question that I asked Sydney. Where do you feel like you were when you're coming home from your mission? Where was your faith? What was your next steps?
I feel like I was also like self-righteous, just because it's like, I just did this really hard thing and I just came home to Ohio where like my friends also like didn't know what was going on, and I just left for 18 months and they're like, hey, you're back. Like, what's going on? And I wasn't like nice when I got home. Like, I remember Sydney telling me that she wanted to go get her nose pierced. And I was just like, oh, I'm not going to do that because I want to be a mission president's wife one day. And it's like, a nose piercing does not decipher.
Well, it shouldn't.
No.
But it probably would, although it should not. Yeah.
Yeah. But I would just like, I would do things like that where I remember like I was in the car with my mom and she like almost got in a car accident, slammed on her brakes, and I think she said like the F word or something. And I just like sobbed because I was like, I can't believe my mom said that. And I remember calling like Sydney about it. And I was just like, Sydney, you would never believe. And she was just like, no, I believe that. Like, absolutely.
You're like, yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
So Sydney, where were you at this time when Lexi got home? Had any developments happened in your faith, or did you have an overlap of when you were both super faithful in this way?
I don't think that we had an overlap when we were both super faithful in this way. So by the time she was on her mission, I was like already starting to kind of like come back to like reality, like, and in a lot of ways, like find myself again after like my mission. So in the between time where I was home for my mission and before she had gone out, I like was dating this guy who like we got engaged, and then like ultimately we were just like not super compatible, but I had in my mind like I need to get married and start a family. And then I also had like, it doesn't matter, like nobody's perfect, like you're never going to find your perfect partner, but as long as you guys are both like dedicated members of the church, like you'll find a way to work it out. So I was like not worried at all that we were like super incompatible. So we got engaged and we were supposed to be getting married at the end of the year. And then like a month before we were supposed to get married, he like broke up with me. Like, and to me, it felt like it was like out of nowhere. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, and that was really hard for me because I had like, well, for lots of reasons, right? Like broken engagements are hard. But I had like felt as though I had received like a revelation or like an answer to my prayer when I like asked if we should get married. So I was like, well, what's that all about then? Because I felt like yes, and then now it's not going to happen. So that kind of like shook me a little bit, but instead I just like doubled down in a lot of ways. So like I started like working in the temple like every week at in Rexburg. So I was like going to school full time. I was working part time. I was working in the temple. And then my whole the whole time I had been home from my mission, I was like in the Relief Society presidency for like every ward that I went to. So I was just like making sure I do everything and like totally burning myself out and like, but I felt like, well, this didn't work out and it was like so heartbreaking. So I need to like draw closer to God so I can like have strength. And I also like, besides the person that I was dating, I hadn't made like a ton of friends in Idaho and like, yeah, I just was feeling like really kind of like disconnected in that way and like disconnected from myself. Until I like met like a really good group of friends at BYU-Idaho, and like I met Gerardo and our like friend group, and I felt like I was really able to like be myself and like laugh and like have fun and do stuff that was like not related to like the church, like not like a family home evening or something like that. With,
But still faithful. Like, I don't think.
Oh yeah, still faithful. Yeah. So we were all like members of the church, and like we were just like going out like, I don't know, on drives and like going to McDonald's at midnight and like going out and like dancing, like, but like basically on campus. Like, yeah, we were still like, I felt like I found a group of people that like I connected with that also like shared my values. And that was like really, I think, changed like my trajectory in a lot of ways as well. Because when like a couple months after that, I met my husband, I was like in a space where I was really like being myself, and I was really like upfront about my beliefs, and I was upfront about like I believe, like one of the questions that I asked him like off the bat was like, I was like, if you had like gay friends and they invited you to a wedding, would you go? Which like a lot of like true believing Mormons like wouldn't go because they're like,
especially in the BYU-Idaho.
Yeah. And he's like, oh, like what, like, what do you think? And I was like, yes, I'll go. Like, I'll be the maid of honor. Like, I'll be like officiating the wedding. Like, I'm super, like, I have a lot of gay friends, and I need you to know that about me. And if you're not okay with that, then like, you know, like I was really like weeding out, like, do you align with my values?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like having the previous experience of like being with someone I was like not really compatible with, then I could see like, wait, no, what do I actually want? And then around that time, so then I was kind of like relaxing on some of my strictness, like in the church too. Like I was
But not like drinking coffee or like
right, yeah,
alcohol.
exactly. No.
Just
It was like when I was Relief Society president, I was like giving a lesson about modesty, and I was like, this says men and women need to be modest. So I don't know what like why they're always talking about our clothes, but like men need to be modest too, you know, like that, and that kind of like pushing against norms. So then while Lexi was on her mission, and I'm like reading, like she's like having a really hard time, but then she's also like, this is the happiest I've ever been. I love like being a missionary and like whatever. So I had kind of the experiences that I had post mission, and like seeing the realities of like the larger church as a whole, and like that church culture that I didn't really know about before. I was able to kind of like read between the lines more of like what she was experiencing, because I had experienced it too. I'm like, okay, I know she's having a really hard time, and like her companions are like making it even like harder for her, and she's like trying to get these resources, but they're like not super helpful. But then in her general email out to everyone, it's like, we had a great week and it was amazing.
Here's who we taught.
Yeah, exactly. So I can like see that. But then I also know, like on my own experiences, like, yeah, you could be having a miserable time, but like you're supposed to be having the best time of your life, and it's supposed to be this great like experience. So that was like difficult too. And then like she said, when she got home, I was like, after I graduated from BYU-Idaho, I got my nose pierced, and I was still like true believing Mormon, like super active in the church, like had a calling, got married in the temple, but I just wanted to have my nose pierced. So I got it pierced. And I got a tattoo like before I like even was thinking about like leaving the church. Like I was just kind of like doing things that felt like authentic to me. Yeah, so then when she came home and was like still in that like missionary high mode of like, I'm going to do everything perfect and like live the gospel perfectly, I was kind of already like, oh, all right, like give it time or whatever. Like, I'm sure that's how you feel. But like, I think maybe I was probably definitely like dismissive of some of her experiences too. Because I was already like, no, I'm over that now. Like, and she's like, yeah, it's like, it's so great. I love the gospel. And like, I prayed and I got this answer. And I'm like, yeah, just because you got an answer doesn't mean you have to do, like, you know, like I was like already kind of like, like,
Yeah,
you can have intuition too, like, you know.
You forget how intense it is. It's really intense. It's an intense experience. As you said, you come home kind of indoctrinated with all of this zealousness towards the gospel, and then you kind of decompress. I feel like that's probably a pretty relatable experience. So when you got home, your sister is in her decompression, kind of decompressed, but still very much in the church. Actually, first, before we hear about you coming home, I want to hear first from you, Sydney. Sounds like you're exploring, you're pushing back against norms. It's very important to you to be an ally to the LGBTQ community. Where would you say, what started you really questioning things? Was there a specific moment? Was it a series of moments? When did that start for you?
I think, so I graduated from college in 2018. I was like education major. I did my student teaching like in Idaho. And the whole time, like my husband and I were going to like our ward, and we were like, we had a calling and like just doing everything we were like supposed to do. And one of the first times that I kind of was like, is this for me or like what's going on, was, so we went to a Spanish ward in Rexburg, like after we got married, just because like it was like a family ward instead of like a married like family ward, and like we spoke Spanish, so we were just like, let's just do that and like practice our Spanish or whatever. And one of the like state conferences that we had that was like broadcast, like every single talk was about like Idaho Mormon pioneers. And it was like, we're so lucky to like be part of this like history of like the first like members in Idaho, and we're like continuing their work or whatever. And I was like, I'm not from Idaho. My husband's not from Idaho. Nobody in my ward is from Idaho. Like, and I was just like, this is so weird that this whole, like all of these talks are about like pioneer heritage, which is like in the Mormon church, like pioneer ancestry is like huge. There's like Pioneer Day is like a holiday or whatever. But we're not pioneers. We're like converts to the church, and we're not from Idaho. We're not from Utah. So I was like, this is really strange to be using a time where we should be like being enlightened or whatever to talk about like your personal family history that like I'm not a part of. So that felt like kind of weird to me. And then after like student teaching, I got a job in Las Vegas, and we moved down to Las Vegas. And
what year was this?
This was in 2019.
Okay, because I remember, because Zach and I would have gone through our faith crisis in January of 2019. And I remember you and your husband going to our house. Oh, sorry. And then, and our apartment. And then we would like just talk about everything we were learning. Joseph Smith had this many wives and did this and that. And I remember like, I mean, you would just take it, but like be kind of uncomfortable with it. Like, did any of that kind of like ever?
Yeah. So actually, thank you for bringing that up, because so that I didn't realize until I watched your Mormon Stories episode where you like didn't mention me at all, but that's fine. I didn't realize at that time that you were like deconstructing, because even though like we were friends, like we were really good friends, like, and like my husband and I knew that like you guys were like living together and we're boyfriends and we're like gonna get married, and we like would go over to your apartment like all the time.
Yeah.
I had just assumed, like, because you guys were gay and like living together, that you didn't believe in the church anymore. I did not realize that you still really did. And like you as a family unit were like wanting to like still be in the church. Which I think I would say most members would just assume that, like, oh, you're gay, like, and you have a boyfriend, like, oh, okay, so you don't believe in the church anymore. But that's not the case. So I remember, like, we would go over and you would, like, tell us all this stuff that you would learn, and we would just, like, listen. And then we'd leave and be like, yeah, Gerardo really wants to talk about the church, I guess. Like we didn't, but I didn't know that, like, you were learning these things for the first time. And I was kind of thinking like, oh, he's like reading like like church stuff or whatever. Cause I hadn't like earnestly learned it for myself yet.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So yeah. But yeah, we were just like, oh, like he's really on about something this week, you know? Yeah. So then that fall we moved to Las Vegas. We were in our ward. We went to a Spanish family ward in Las Vegas as well. And everyone was so nice to us, and we're like in a new city. We don't have any family in Las Vegas. So it's like, that's your community, you know? And we made friends with a couple who, like, one of them, she was like reactivating in the church, and then her husband had gotten baptized, and they were like close to our age. And I realized that, like, I didn't talk to them about the church the same way I would talk to like my other friends about the church who were like all like Mormons, like all my BYU-Idaho friends, where we could kind of like complain about stuff that we were seeing or like, yeah, like I could be like, oh, like it's weird that this woman in Relief Society went on this like weird rant about whatever, like, I'm not going to mention that to them. I'll be like, oh yeah, like the church is great. So that was like my first moment where I was like, why do I feel like I need to hide things about the church to these like new members? And like, I started to feel really uncomfortable about like missionary work. Like I went out with the sister missionaries all the time still when I was in Las Vegas. And like we had a missionary lesson about like the word of wisdom, and the sisters were like, oh, like we read the scripture, and then they were like, so like, do you promise like not to drink alcohol and not to drink coffee? And then in the scripture, it says like that you should eat meat sparingly, like only in times of famine, and like focus on like eating like grains. And the person that we were meeting with, she was like, oh, well, I'm about to start a keto diet. So like, I'm going to be eating a lot of meat and like not a lot of grains. And they were like, oh yeah, that's fine. Like that's totally fine. Just like, don't drink
Just
coffee.
ignore that part.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, like it's actually kind of bad for your body to not eat any grains, like, and it's not that bad to like drink coffee sometimes, you know, like that. I was like starting to be like, this feels uncomfortable, but like I don't know like how to move with this discomfort, like I don't know like what it means to me, so it's just kind of like, okay, we'll just like keep moving through it. And then it wasn't until I stayed in Las Vegas for a semester because I was teaching, and then my husband had to go back to BYU-Idaho for a semester. So we were like living apart, and I like got really sick, and I had my ward there, and they like, one of the sisters from a Relief Society like drove me to urgent care, and like they brought me food and like washed my laundry for me. And I was just like so like grateful. I was like how else could I have a community like this to like take care of me? So I was kind of balancing that too. Like I'm having this discomfort about like the doctrines of the church. But also like I have this community that I really care about and are really good to me and like really loving. And And it wasn't until like the beginning of the pandemic, like my husband and I kind of like fizzled out on like virtual church, and we were just kind of like taking like a break. Like I think a lot of people kind of had this experience and feeling like, oh, like this is kind of nice to just be like us. And when things started to open back up, we like tried to go to church a couple times, but it felt kind of like uncomfortable. We were like asked, like we had moved also, so we were like in a new ward, and they like asked us like to do a calling like right away, and I was like, no, like we're kind of like like you don't know anything about us. And I also thought that I felt like they extended this calling to us so immediately, and I recognized it as like a straight privilege, where like if my friends who are gay and still believe in the church like came to a ward for the first time, they would not be extended a calling at all. And I felt like, should I accept to be able to do something that like my loved ones can't do? So like all of these things were kind of like coming up around the same time, like all of this like discomfort, until like in, I think 2021, the like musket fire talk is kind of like where it all came to a head. So this is like Jeffrey R. Holland's talk that he gave, I think like at a BYU devotional, maybe.
Yeah. So an apostle of the church gave a pretty intense talk about being part of the LGBT community, and like members should fight for traditional values and traditional family, like with musket fire, the kind of stuff, kind of rhetoric.
Yeah. So I was like, this is like a group of people who are already being attacked with like physical violence. Like people are being killed because they're being killed because people hate gay people and like trans people, not because they are gay or trans, but because of hateful people who are like harming them. And that was the first time that I said like out loud to my husband, I don't think I want to be part of this church anymore. Like, and even then, like after I said it, we kind of just were like, okay, like we don't want to be a part of the church. And then it was a while before we started digging into like, what does that mean for us? And like, how do we feel about it? But like, that was a moment where I was like, I don't want to be a part of this. And not because like, I still didn't have a great understanding of like true like church history or anything. Like I believed what is being said is harmful and not aligned with like the gospel of Jesus Christ as I understand it. And I don't want to be part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that talk just, for a lot of people, because I can relate, who were trying to make sense of the church's policies for LGBTQ people and trying to, well, but, you know, we still love them, or I still love them, and maybe there's something in the afterlife that we don't understand. Then when someone like an apostle of this church just says such blatantly hateful things, it's like, I can't keep justifying this stuff, right? Like, I feel like that was such a final straw for so many people because it was just so obvious. Even though I think the church was always teaching those things, it was kind of like for our generation, that moment where it was like, they're telling us who they are. And, you know, you can't, it became almost impossible to justify at that point because of how clear they made it. Yeah. Lexi, same question for you. You are now home from your mission, so you're still on that high. Tell us about decompressing and then when that maybe led into deconstructing.
So when I got home from my mission, I stayed in Ohio for like about 6 months before I moved out to Utah, because I did go to school out here. And I remember like I got a job at a bank. Like I tried to get a calling like to work in the temple, but they told me I couldn't for some reason. And I was just like, okay, like that's random, but I guess I don't want to drive an hour and a half anyways to go work in the temple like twice a week. And then I was just like trying to reconnect with my friends. I was trying to go out with the missionaries. I didn't transfer my records into our YSA branch because I did not want a calling, but I did want a calling in my family's ward because I wanted to go out with the missionaries. And so I didn't do what Sydney did, but I did go to 2 churches. I would go to like my parents' ward, and then I would go to the YSA. And then I remember like June, this is 2 months before I moved to Utah, one of my friends that I had met at BYU-Idaho who lived up in Canada came out because he wanted to go like see Chicago. He wanted to go to Pride in Columbus, and there's like a lantern festival going on. And I remember like he came down, and then 2 of my other friends who didn't really understand that what I was doing, like what the whole like Mormon mission thing, what the church, but they just wanted to be supportive. And I remember just being like, wow, like these are some of my greatest friends, and I just keep leaving them for this religion. But then again, I was just like, whatever, I'm going to be closer to my sister. And so then I do all my fun things. Me and my mom, we pack up my car, we drive out to Utah, we take a detour and stop by Sydney at BYU-Idaho, and then we move myself in so I could go to school out here. I was living in Provo at the time.
Which school?
I went to UVU.
Okay.
And honestly, love UVU. I have only positive things to say about them. I feel like they have great support. But I really, really wanted to go to BYU. But I didn't get accepted because my grades weren't that good. But now I'm grateful that I didn't go. And I moved here August of 2019. I only have a handful of months before the pandemic hit. So it's like I'm going to church. I'm trying to be active. Like I'm going to like the YSA activities. I'm going to church every Sunday. And then like my roommates, one of them was my MTC companion. One of them was a sister from my mission. And then the other one was just someone who also like very strong in the church. And we were always trying to like do like a family home evening together. We were always excited to go to these events together. Like we just tried to keep things like pure. And when the pandemic hit and like church was kind of just like off for a minute and we were trying to figure things out, I remembered being like, okay, I'm going to take this time to like figure myself out, because it's like no one's seeing what I'm doing except for my roommates. And I stopped like wearing my garments, and I was just like going to parties. At this time I wasn't like drinking, like I was just going out with my friends who were drinking and stuff, just like getting into that environment, saying like, do I want to be in this environment or do I not? Because I felt like it was the time, not during a pandemic, right, to go to a party, but
I see what you're saying. You felt like you had some space.
Yes.
Gave you time to reflect and realize like, oh, maybe I want to revisit where I'm putting my time and attention in my life. Yeah.
Right. And like I wasn't wearing my garments at this time, and I remember my roommate, like she was wearing her garments, but I was going to these parties with her where she was getting like blackout drunk, and she'd be like, well, maybe you should wear your garments. And I'm like, ooh, like, I don't know if necessarily you can really tell me that, because like you're not really up to code for like wearing garments. And then she was just like, hey, that's between me and God. Like if I want to wear my garments, I was like, no, like absolutely, but don't tell me that I should be wearing them. And then like the pandemic just kept going, and I just like, I'm working, I'm going to like work with like troubled teens at the time, like these teens who are not from Utah, they're from all over the country. So the only thing they know about like the Mormon religion is what their like staff have been. And I worked with both people who were very strong in the church and very like people who were never a part of the church, or people who were a part of the church and like went on missions and left the church. Like it's just a huge melting pot, but everyone knew what it was. And I remember I would just like lie and be like, yeah, like, no, I've never been a part of the church. I just moved here to go to UVU because I just like was embarrassed. And I was like, why am I embarrassed of the church where everyone knows what it is? I'm like, it's not cool. It's not uncool to be a part of it. Like if it's what I believed, it's what I believed. But I was just like soul on, like, I don't know anything about the church. And then I remember like the sister from my mission got a job there and just like exposed that she knew me from our LDS mission. And I remember one of the kids coming up to me and they're like, so Lexi, heard you went on an LDS mission. And I said, oh. I felt so stuck in that moment because I was like, I can't lie anymore because now I'm exposed. And then I remember like one of my coworkers who's like pretty strong in the church. He did not have a car, so I would drive him home from work because he was just a sweet baby angel. And we were talking about the church, and he was just like, hey, if you ever want to come back to church, like, you are more than welcome to come with me. And I was just like, how worthy do you feel right now? And he was like, do you need a blessing? And I was like, yeah, I would like a blessing, actually. And he was like, you could just see the excitement on his face. And in the blessing, though, I remember him saying that the step that I wanted to take to like walk away from something, I needed to do that. And I was like, all right, like that's my answer right there. Like haven't been going to church. Like I've stopped wearing my garments. I've just been doing my own thing, like figuring out who I am. And now this blessing, if it is true, if it's not true, it just confirmed that I needed to walk away.
A priesthood blessing.
How worthy do you feel? It's such a funny question.
And also him just like, jackpot, baby, I'm worthy and I'm ready. And then giving a blessing, which ultimately you interpreted as I can step away from this thing.
Yeah. And it was like at first really scary because I was just like, wow, like I live in Utah. I went on a mission, like my sister at this time, like this is when we were not really talking to each other about it, still trying to support each other. I was like, my sister's really active in it. Like my parents like want to get sealed as a family in the temple. Like, what do I do? And I remember like trying to like let Sydney know without like actually telling her. So I would like send her pictures of me like wearing something like a shirt that obviously my shoulders are hanging out. And I would like kind of make comments here and there. And then I remember I went down to visit her for like Thanksgiving or something. And we went on like Fremont Street and I was like, I'm going to get an alcoholic daiquiri. And she was like, oh, all right. Like if that's what you want. And I was like, okay, this is like the best transition I have because she was so supportive. I didn't end up getting it. I just wanted to see like what the feeling was, and she was just like, yeah, absolutely, if you want it. I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna spend $30 on this right
You're like, I was testing you.
Yeah.
Well, where were you at that point, Sydney?
So I feel like I was like probably like still like battling with like my like discomforts.
So you weren't fully out.
Yeah, I wasn't fully out, but there was like a long period of time before I was like fully out that I was like,
Whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Where like in my personal like worship or whatever, like I was still like doing what I felt like was like true to me and what I believed like about the church and about the world. But I was also like, yeah, it's hard. Like if you are feeling like this is how you like deal with it, that's all right. And I kind of feel like I also wasn't sure like where she was like where Lexi like stood because like she just said like she was like not doing anything in the church and then was like, hey, can I get a blessing? So it was kind of like back and forth what she would share with me too. Like she would say like, oh, like I went and did this thing that doesn't align with the church, and then like she'd text me later in the week, like, yeah, I went to church and like I met my bishop. He's so precious. And I'm like, okay. Like, so I just wasn't sure like what her like situation was or what her like beliefs or goals for herself were. So I was just kind of like, all right, like if that's where you're at right now,
do your thing.
Yeah. All right. Like Vegas, baby.
At what point does it actually collide where like you actually tell each other that you have left?
I think in like the summer of 2022, I actually ended up moving to Las Vegas. My like mental health was pretty bad, and Sydney and her husband had like talked about, and they're like, hey, you can come live with us for the summer, like try to figure things out, like just to have the supportive family. And I think that's like when we had our actual like, we shared our stances on what we were believing, what we're not believing. Like that we both are just like not with the church. And I feel like at this moment we had done so much of like, we both kind of knew. And so there was a lot more like love and like trust in the moment where we were both like, yeah, like this is not for us anymore. And there was no judgment. It was just like all acceptance, like absolutely, like I support you, you support me.
Yeah. Nice.
Well, I just am curious, and I can totally relate to, but I'm curious why during your deconstruction journeys, why, or maybe you were a little bit more than you've shared, but why do you feel like you weren't sharing with each other as you were deconstructing? Like what led you to wait until you both kind of thought that you were out, if that's how you feel like it was?
I think that part of it is like because we were kind of like accountable to each other in our like progression in the church. So like when I was on my mission and I was thinking about going home, I was thinking, no, I can't go home because I need to be an example for my sister in the church. And then when she was on her mission, she's like, I have to do this because like my sister did it. And like, we were just kind of like always had that dynamic like in the church, and would like celebrate like each other's milestones. And so I think definitely that's like part of it. I think for me, the other part of it was like, because I didn't know where I was going to end up in my like faith journey, I didn't want to like tell her like I'm not going to church or like I'm not like because I didn't know like if I say it out loud, does that mean I have to leave? So just kind of like acknowledging that, like I said, like even to my husband, I didn't like my husband and I both also were like having discomforts on our own about the church and like about the way things were handled like at the beginning of the pandemic and with like the Black Lives Matter movement. And there was like a thing that came out about like the church was like misusing funds or like not being transparent in where they're spending their tithing. So like we just were like kind of like, what's going on? Okay. But even like with my husband, it wasn't until the musket fire talk that I said out loud, like to him, I don't want to be part of this. So it was like even longer after that before I was able to like admit to my sister, well, I'm not going to be part of this anymore.
Right. Because at that point you were still believing, right? I mean, not believing in the sense that you were doing everything, but like you hadn't deconstructed your belief in like Joseph or First Vision, Book of Mormon, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So does that happen for you, Sydney?
So I feel that, so I left, like I decided I didn't want to be part of the church, like in fall of 2021, I guess. And that winter, I went to a church like service. And I actually like shared with you and Zach about it, like, cause on my way home from it, I stopped at Zach and Gerardo's house and I was like telling them like, I felt really uncomfortable during the service. But I don't know what that like means for me because I was like, do I believe in like the afterlife that the church has like taught me? Or do I like not believe in any of it? And something that Gerardo said to me was like, you don't have to figure it out right now. And I was like, oh, that's a good point. Like, I don't have to figure it out right now. And I can like pick and choose like what I want to think about and what I want to focus on. So like before that, I hadn't really like gotten into any of the like post-Mormon like resources basically that exist, like including Mormon Stories podcast. I hadn't really like listened to any episodes because I kind of was like frozen. Like I don't want to I've made my decision of like what I want my relationship to the church to be, but I haven't like looked at like the whole of like what does this mean like eternally for me.
Right.
So that would like after like I feel like you kind of like gave me permission to like unpack it like at my own speed, because I felt like I always like kind of struggle with like black and white thinking, so I felt like if I'm gonna dig into like what I believe, I have to like figure it all out right now, and that's not true. Like I can like slowly like
figure
learn.
it out.
Yeah, exactly. So like I know a really popular resource is people read like the CES letter, and I was like, I don't think I want to read that. Like I don't know. I feel like there'll be a lot of things that will bring up for me. So then I was like, well, let me just listen to Gerardo's like Mormon Stories podcast, because I know him and I know a lot of his story already.
I actually didn't know this part of the story.
Oh yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So I was like, that was like the first episode that I listened to, because I was like, this is my friend. And that's when I realized, like I mentioned before, that I didn't know that you hadn't, like, that you still believed in the church for as long as you did. So I feel like then I was like, okay, I can listen to some podcast episodes, or I can like read some resources. 'Cause there's also like I mentioned when I first started going to church, that there's like, there's a whole language like in the church that if you've never been to the church, you don't understand like ordinances and restoration and like whatever.
Covenants,
covenants. And when you leave the church and you enter like specifically post like Mormon or ex-Mormon spaces, there's a whole other like language of like deconstruction and nuance and like
well, the names of the people, Sandra Tanner or whatever, we mentioned
exactly,
very casually, but if
or
and just the information. I mean, I've learned way, 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 way more in my deconstruction about the church than I ever even wondered about while in the church. So it can feel really daunting. It still feels daunting to me a lot of times.
Yeah, absolutely. So that kind of like started my actual deconstruction. So there were several months where I was like, okay, I'm not in the church, but like, what does that mean? Like, I don't know. Because some people have a similar conclusion, I guess, where they think like, okay, the mainstream church is like not aligned with the actual teachings of Jesus Christ. I think I need to start my own group and like practice some things that the church used to talk about. And, you know, like you can take that like, okay, the church is like not doing what it's meant to do, and interpret it a lot of different ways.
Totally.
So for me, it wasn't like, okay, the church isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing, I need to like find a new church. It was like, the church isn't doing it for me. I don't even like, do I believe any of this? Like, do I believe in a God or an afterlife or whatever?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really, really lovely advice that you gave, Gerardo, because I think sometimes that can prevent people from doing what they feel like they want to do in leaving the church, because then all of a sudden you feel like, well, then what do I think about an afterlife? What do I think about, obviously death is a huge one. What do I think about my purpose of life? I think it's really great advice for someone beginning deconstruction, which I think a lot of times it starts in earnest when you decide to actually step away from the church, to, you know, say that that's probably going to be a lifelong process in a lot of ways. And so I think that's really helpful. I want to ask the same question of you, Lexi, when you said you kind of you told us how you decided to step away. Did you have a similar journey? Did you then kind of dig into it more? How did you move from there?
I think I think there's a lot of different directions I took. I don't think it was just like a one-track thing, because at the same time, I did not really want to accept it. Because I like my garments, for example, I kept them in just like a trash bag, and I moved to like 3 different places where my garments were just in this giant trash bag because I was like not ready to part with them.
Didn't want to wear them, but didn't want to throw them away.
Yeah. And I still had like my missionary tag like on advertisement everywhere I was going, because it was like, I'm so proud of it. And another thing is, it's like, I didn't really want to tell my sister about it because I didn't know where she was, and I didn't want her to judge me. And I was also afraid she was going to tell my mom. And so I think when I didn't really look into deep doctrine, because for me, I was just like, I don't want to learn more. I'm like, I don't need to learn more about why Joseph Smith did what he did. I don't need to learn more about polygamy. I don't need to know more. Right in this moment, I know enough that I don't want to be a part of it. So just like, I know everyone goes through their healing process differently and like goes through trauma differently. But for me, I was just like, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to go through it. I don't, like, there's no reason for me, because the best way for me to step away is to step away completely and not have it run my life. And I still like run into people like now who like, it's the reason they do everything is because they grew up Mormon. And I was just, my brain is always like, okay, like I understand that's how you deal with that. But to me, I'm like, I just want to forget about it, because I feel like I have had enough like negative experiences, and I feel like it made me doubt who I was for so long, where it's like, no, like if I think about the church and I talk about the church and it's in my everyday vocabulary, I'm not going to continue to grow. And again, I know everyone is like processes things differently, but for me personally, it was enough. And I remember just like taking scissors just on the off chance that things are true. I still cut up my garments.
Better to be safe.
Yeah. And I had so many of them. And I remember I was just like cutting them up for like 2.5 hours, just making sure that I got like every little detail, like it's just gone.
Yeah. For those who don't know, with the garments, when you are ready to dispose of them, like if you're still in the church and they're dirty or you outgrow them, you're supposed to cut the symbols out before you just throw them away. Like it's pretty blasphemous, I would say, to just like throw your garments in the trash with the symbols of the garment still intact. So that's why you were cutting them out.
Yes. However, I was cutting up like the whole garment. I was just like, I don't want anyone to know like what these were. And I threw them away, and I was just like, okay. And I remember like one of my like best friends from my mission, I gave her my scriptures from my mission that had like all my notes on it, because I was like, I know this is going to mean a lot to her, because to me, it doesn't mean anything anymore. And that was kind of it. And I remember just being so scared to tell my sister about it, because I was like, this is like my best friend or like my mom, like these are my support group. But at the same time, I was like, I'm able to hide this because I don't live in the same state as any of them. Because like the whole thing has always been like, what is Lexi up to? What's Lexi going to do next? Nobody knows. And I purposely kept it like that so no one could ask me questions.
Was it such a relief when you finally were able to tell and were met with love and acceptance, it sounds like? I mean, maybe it wasn't that easy, but what was it like when you finally were able to tell that truth?
It's been pretty nice. And I think one of the things with it too, it's like it's built mine and my sister's relationship like immensely. I might tear about this because I love my sister. But I feel like for a long time, there was a lot of judgment when I would like talk to Sydney about things. And I feel like now, like if I turned to her and I was just like, hey, this is what's going on, she's very quick to be like, okay, like how can I support you? Like if this is what you want to do, like absolutely. And it's just like, it feels nice because it feels like she is on my side 100%. And I hope she feels the same way, that I'm on her side 100%.
That's so lovely. Gerardo might have another question, but the last question I want to ask, which I think you touched on there, is I know for me personally, even people I've known my whole life, after leaving Mormonism myself, it almost feels like I get to meet people again because I feel like I'm now actually myself. And so I just wanted to ask, and maybe you can answer this, Sydney, since Lexi spoke to it, but what it's been like for your relationship to maybe reconnect or to connect again in a different way now, having gone through all that you've gone through.
I feel very similar, that like there's more of an openness in the way that we communicate with one another. And before there was like a lot of judgment and a lot of like like a prescribed path that we need to follow, right? Like we go on our missions and then we get married in the temple and then you start a family and you keep going to church, where now there's like a freedom of like we can just do what we want to do and what feels authentic to us. And so when my sister shares with me like plans that she has, I'm not thinking of it through this lens of like, what should she be doing? Because there's nothing she should be doing besides like what she wants, you know? I feel like it has been helpful to me to be a better sister to her and to like be very open. And it has definitely helped me to understand as well, like Lexi mentioned earlier, that later after her mission, she was diagnosed bipolar. And that has helped me like learning about bipolar disorder and what that can look like. And I think that has really helped me to understand and like be open and like gentle with things that she's going through. Where before, like she was saying in the mission and then the church, it's like, oh, well, are you praying or are you going to church? And I think if I were still in the church, I would maybe say that to her rather than like, are you like doing other things that can be helpful to you for your mental health, or just checking in, how are you feeling? And like, what state are you in? To kind of guide our conversations of like how I can best support her, or if she even needs support, if she's just telling me to tell me and not really expecting like a solution or an answer or things like that. I think in the same way, like I've always had like really bad like anxiety, and I think that the church really like augmented that, where like I was always worried like what's my next move, and is that what God wants me to do, and is that going to put me on the path like to heaven or whatever. And I feel like in my own life I can just like do what I want to do, and I can prioritize what's important to me. So in my family, like with my husband, and I had my first baby earlier this year, so I have a 6-month-old at home, and I feel like so grateful that like we can like be together as a family and just be like present and follow the path that we want to, rather than like, I don't know, like I'm grateful that I don't have like a newborn baby at home and my husband is like at church, like doing his calling, and I'm like at home by myself. Or I worried a lot before about like losing the community in the church, where this week while I'm out of town, my husband is home with our baby alone for the week, and we have friends. Like I have friends who are going to be checking on him every day and like giving him a couple hours to like decompress and like do a chore or whatever. Like, I don't know. I just feel like I have such a beautiful community like outside of the church that's like more open to just like appreciating me for me and not like me because I'm in the church.
Yeah.
I love that. That's beautiful.
Yeah. I'm not sure I have any other questions, but this has been great. That's beautiful.
Thank you so much. I said this, I think, before we started recording, but I think it's really beautiful to have you here as sisters, and I'm so happy for you. I'm happy that, it's not always the case that faith journeys always line up, and they didn't perfectly, of course, but I'm just so happy that you both have experienced so much life together. You came to the church later in life, and just to have someone to go through that journey with in so many ways is really beautiful, and you seem like such great sisters to each other. So thank you so much for sharing your story. I've learned a lot from you both, and thank you everyone for listening.
And we'll see you again in another episode of Mormon Stories podcast. Goodbye, everybody.